Million-Word Reading Project. Collection 1. Book 9. The Detective Club. Produced by Million-Word Reading Project Workshop. One. The Detective Club. Now, I am going to tell this exactly as it happened, and then you can decide whether you think Betty Bliss was a clever detective or not. It began in Betty's living room right here in Westgate, and there were 5 of us in it. I was there, my name is Madge, and of course Betty was there, and so was Dorothy Carver. The 2 boys were Dick Prince, who lives next door to Betty, and Arthur Dane, who lives next beyond Dick. We all live in the same neighborhood and in 10th Street. So we had formed the 10th Street Reading Circle, and we were reading detective mystery stories together. One of us read a chapter, and then another read a chapter, and so on. So this evening we were reading the last of The Mystery of the Golden Puffin. This is a pretty good story, and Betty Bliss said, "I'd love to be a detective. All my life I've wanted to be a detective." This was so. I remembered when Betty persuaded me to go with her to see Mr. Cassidy, the chief of detectives in Westgate. He told us a lot of things about detecting, and Betty said then she wished she could be a detective. "Yes," I said, "and I remember when Mr. Cassidy put the handcuffs on us. I was glad when he took them off again. But he did say girls could be detectives when they grew up," Betty said. "There are lots of women detectives." "Women, maybe," said Dick Prince coldly. "But I've never heard of girl detectives." "Just because there never have been any girl detectives," Betty Bliss said, "I'll tell you what would be fun. We'll form a detective club to do real detecting. Just the 5 of us." "Not for me," said Dick Prince, who thinks he is smart. "I don't go into any detective club with girls." "All right then," said Betty Bliss, "you boys need come in. We girls will be the detective club. We'll make it a sort of Scotland Yard, Madge, like the one in London. I'll be superintendent, and you and Dot can be inspectors." "We'd better not call it Scotland Yard," Dot said. "If we solve a lot of cases and become famous all over the world, we wouldn't want anybody to think we were the London Scotland Yard, would we?" "Listen to them," laughed Dick Prince. "Famous? Wow! We can call ourselves 10th Street Yard," said Betty, paying no attention to Dick. "That's where we are, on 10th Street. So that was what we decided to call our detective club, and we made Betty Bliss the superintendent, and Dot and me inspectors, while the boys joked about it. But Betty was serious. "You wait," she said. "One of these days there'll be a crime in Westgate, and 10th Street Yard will do some detecting, and maybe you'll be surprised." And the next morning, a crime was discovered. Betty had asked Dot and me to go over to her house and play croquet. We got there as she was finishing breakfast, and we went out of the house together. But as soon as we got to the lawn, we saw Silas, the man of all work for the block, getting ready to cut the grass. "Oh, well, we'll do something else now," Betty said. "Let's go over and play at Dick's, shall we?" So we went around through the gates into Dick Prince's yard, and there, we saw Dick and Arthur. "Betty," Dick said, "we were just going to get you. If you want to be a detective, here's your chance. Woof is gone. Someone stole him." Arthur Dane pointed to the big doghouse, to which Woof was always chained. "He's gone all right," he said. "We came out to feed him and he was gone. Stolen. And more than one man was needed to steal him. I say it would take 3 or 4 men to get away with Woof." Betty was already on her way to the doghouse, and Dot and I were close behind her. Betty stopped before she reached the doghouse and looked at Dick. "What have you done about it?" she asked. "You weren't coming for me first, were you? Didn't you tell the police?" "Yes," Dick said. "I did that the very first thing. I went in and asked them to send up a policeman, and one is on the way now. He'll be here any minute. But you talk so much about wanting to be a detective that I thought I'd give you a chance." The big doghouse stood at the side of the Prince garage. Now, the splendid Belgian police dog was gone. When he was in the doghouse, he always came out to greet Betty and Dot and me because he liked us. He would jump to meet us, pulling at the chain that fastened him and barking with joy, but now there was only the empty doghouse. A tin plate with a dog biscuit and some dog food was on the smooth ground. The biscuit and the food were untouched, showing that Woof had been gone when Dick and Arthur put the plate there. Before Betty could make any closer inspection, the policeman came, and Dick's mother came from the house. She spoke to the policeman, and he touched his cap and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Prince." He was the pleasant red-faced officer who patrolled our part of town, and we all knew him to speak to. He drew his notebook from his pocket, pushed his cap to the back of his head, and began asking questions, writing down the answers in the notebook. "Name of owner?" asked Officer Murphy. "What kind of dog? What color? Any special marks on him? What is the value of the dog?" He asked a couple of dozen such questions, and Dick answered them. He said that Woof had cost $50 when they bought him, and that he was now full-grown and worth over $100. "And that's important," said Officer Murphy. $100 dog is a serious matter. And I shouldn't wonder if the whole detective force would be after the thief. I hope you find him. He's a good dog, said Dick Prince. "We'll do our best," said Officer Murphy, putting his notebook in his pocket, "but these dog stealers are very professional. You see how it is, they come in a car and put the dog into it by night, and by morning they can be a couple of 100 miles away, and who knows where to look for the dog." "Isn't there anything else we can do?" Dick asked, and Officer Murphy turned to Mrs. Prince. "You might advertise, ma'am," he said. "Like $50 reward will be paid for the return of a Belgian police dog and so on. Dog thieves steal dogs for the money they can get, and they don't care whose. Often, if no questions asked is put into the advertisement, they would return the animal. That's often the best way to get a dog back." "But, Mr. Murphy," asked Betty, "don't the detectives look for clues and follow them and find dogs?" "Well, young lady," said Officer Murphy as he prepared to go, "I suppose the detective force does the best it can, but what sort of a clue would there be when a dog is taken away? Not any, I'm thinking. We do the best we can. So good day to you." With that, Officer Murphy went away, and Mrs. Prince went into the house to telephone an advertisement to the paper, as I supposed, and Betty Bliss turned to Dick and Arthur. "If you boys want to join the detective club," she said, "now is your chance. We are not going to play detective, we are really going to detect. We are going to find Woof, and we are going to find who stole him. Do you want to join 10th Street Yard, or don't you?" "Yes?" Dick spoke just as coldly as the night before. "How are you going to do anything?" "There's nothing to do. Murphy said so. There's no clue, no footprints or fingerprints or anything. Art and I will keep out of it." Well, there did not seem to be anything to begin with. The empty doghouse couldn't talk, and the dog, where was he? But Inspector Betty Bliss of 10th Street Yard had already turned her back on Dick and Arthur, and she was examining the empty doghouse. "Look here, Inspector," she said to Dot. "I want you to look at this chain. It has been cut." Dot and I and the two boys went to look at the short piece of chain still hanging from the staple in the doghouse. "Yes, we saw that," Dick said. "We saw that as soon as we saw that Woof was gone. That doesn't help us. They had to cut the chain to get Woof loose. That staple wouldn't come out." "It may not mean anything," Betty said, "but maybe it might. How would you say the chain was cut, Art?" Arthur bent down and looked at the link. "You can see it was not filed," said Betty. "If it had been filed, we could see the scratches a file always makes. I did not think it would be filed. A file makes a noise, and the noise might have awakened someone in the house. The thief would not want to make a noise." "You're right," Arthur said. "It was not filed, Betty." "And it was not broken," said Betty. "You can see that none of the links are worn. It is a new chain and strong." "It was cut, Betty," I said. "Anyone can see that." "And cut with nippers, or whatever people use to cut chains with," Betty said. "Don't you think so, Dick?" "That's right," Dick admitted. "So if we could discover who had the nippers, we would know who cut the chain and stole Woof." "Sure," said Dick. And there are only about 5 million pairs of nippers in the United States. 10 million, I'll bet you. Well, anyway, said Betty, rising, that cuts down the possible suspects about one half, because only a man or a boy would use nippers and cut a chain. A girl or a woman wouldn't. A girl or a woman wouldn't steal a dog, not a big dog like Woof, said Dot. If a woman stole a dog, it would be a small dog. Right you are, Inspector, said Betty. We must look for a man or a boy. Now, why was the chain cut? Why, to steal the dog, you poor fool, laughed Dick. Why else would he cut the chain? Betty looked at Dick in such a funny way that he colored. I may be a fool, Betty said, but I seem to remember that there was a snap hook on the other end of the chain, a hook that snapped into the ring on Woof's collar. All anyone had to do was to unsnap the hook. Now, please tell me why the thief cut the chain close to the doghouse when all he had to do was unsnap the hook from the collar? You can tell me that, Inspector Madge. Can I? I said, but I couldn't. The thief wanted the chain, suggested Betty. You know Woof, Inspector. You couldn't keep Woof tied with a rope. He'd chews right through a rope. This thief knew you couldn't tie a big dog with a rope and expect to keep him. So he needed the chain. And doesn't that mean that the thief was not a professional dog stealer, as Officer Murphy was saying? Why does it? Arthur asked. Because I think that a professional dog stealer would be prepared and have a chain. He would have unsnapped this chain from Woof's collar and snapped on his own. Betty, I said, you are a wonder. Please call me Superintendent when you address me, Inspector, Betty said, and Arthur laughed. I'll say you are pretty good anyway, Superintendent, he said. I wouldn't have thought of the snap hook in a million years. What else do you see, Miss Sherlock Holmes? There's something I don't see, said Betty. And sometimes what you don't see is as important as what you do see. I don't see any claw scratches on the ground in front of the doghouse. What does Woof do when any stranger tries to take him anywhere, Dick? He drags back, Dick admitted. It takes a strong fellow to pull him. And his claws leave scratches, said Betty. There are no scratches here, so we must deduce one of two things. Either he was carried away, or he went willingly. He couldn't have been carried away by strangers or he would have barked, so he must have gone willingly with someone he knew and was friendly with. Did he bark last night? No, Dick said. He didn't bark. My opinion is that he was taken by someone he would follow willingly, Betty went on. Now, who knew Woof that well? There's the butcher boy, suggested Arthur. He comes every day. He brings a bone for Woof now and then. Jimmy Schluter? He would never steal a dog, said Betty. Who else, Dick? There's Ed Dawson, the grocer's boy, and the iceman, and Charlie Wong, the laundryman, and Nick, the vegetable man. No. Betty shook her head. I don't believe they'd steal a dog. Anybody else? I can't think of anyone, Dick told her. Then it seems as if we had come to two dead ends, said Betty seriously. They don't join. Woof was stolen by someone he knew, but no one he knew would steal him. Betty, you're so funny, Dot said. You sound like a book detective. All you need now is to say, but I could do with a bite to eat, Inspector. They always say that. I've had my breakfast, Betty said. She was not interested in joking. She stood looking at the doghouse, going over the clues one by one again. I can't see where I was wrong, she said. There must be someone else who knew Woof and was friendly with him. Try to think, Dick. All Dick could think of was some of the boys we all play with now and then, but we knew they would not steal a dog. It did look as if Betty had come to a dead end. Suddenly she said, "Ah, did you think of something?" I asked. I think our next step in this investigation will take us some distance from the scene of the crime, Inspector, Betty said seriously. Dick, do you think your mother will let you have the car this morning? I'll ask her, Dick said, giving Arthur a strange smile. If you want it for detective work, Mother might let me take it. Dick's mother came to the kitchen door when he had spoken to her. She said she did not think we ought to go far in the car, and I saw that she did not take Betty's detective ability at all seriously. but Dick came to Betty's help. "Oh, Mother, please," he begged, and Mrs. Prince said, "Very well, but do drive carefully and don't go far." So we 3 members of 10th Street Yard and Dick and Arthur got into the car, and Dick drove where Betty told him to go. We went across town to the section where a few small houses stood near the swamp. "Silas's house?" Dick cried. "You're right, Betty, he does know Woof. I never thought of Silas coming to cut the lawn every week. She's some detective, Arthur." "Listen," Betty ordered. The car made some noise, but even while we were quite a distance from Silas's house, we heard a dog barking, an unhappy dog. "Woof," came the deep bark, and then a pause and again "woof," and this was repeated again and again. The barking came from inside Silas's house, a dog saying that he did not want to be shut in, and that he wanted his master. We got out of the car as soon as Dick stopped it. Betty ran to the house, but its window was too high, so she pulled up a box, and the 3 girls of 10th Street Yard climbed onto it and looked in at the window. A dog was there, and a big dog too, but he was not Woof. He was a huge dog with dirty hair, tied by a rope to the leg of a bed, not at all like the stolen dog. Well, I wish you could have seen Betty's face. She had been so sure that we would see Woof. She was certainly disappointed. I wanted to say something, but I could not think of anything particularly comforting to say, so we all got into the car again, and Dick drove us home. Now, I suppose every car makes its own special sort of noise. A good detective probably knows that, and almost every dog knows the noise made by its owner's car. Anyway, as we drove into the Prince driveway, a dog barked in Arthur Dane's father's garage that stood close beside the Prince garage, and it was Woof's bark. Betty said nothing, but Art and Dick laughed. Dick opened the door of the garage and there stood Woof, the chain still on his collar, wagging his tail with joy. I think that Betty, just at first, was almost angry. Her face turned red, anyway, but Dick calmed her down. "Don't be angry, Betty," he said. "We played a trick on you, but you win anyway." "I win?" Betty asked. "You do," Dick said. "To trick you was hardly fair play. Art and I got Officer Murphy to take part in it, just for a joke. Mother knew, too. But every deduction you made was correct, and just as true of me as it was of Silas. Woof does know me, and I did cut the chain. Woof did follow me without being dragged. And after all, I said, Betty did discover where Woof was without your telling her, didn't she?" "Yes," said Dick. And then, after a moment's pause, he said, "Yes, Inspector," and Mrs. Prince came to the door with a plate of newly cooked doughnuts. When he saw the doughnuts, Dick said, just like a real Scotland Yard mystery story, "I think, Superintendent, we could all do with a bite to eat." He was right, and we did have a bite to eat, just like real detectives. 2. The Flat Tire Mystery. I think one of the best mysteries our detective club ever solved was the crime of the flat tire. Of course, Betty Bliss did most of it, although Dot Carver and I helped. Our club met every Thursday, and there were just the 3 of us in it, Betty and Dot and I. The constitution of the club said, "Object, to solve crimes and mysteries," because Betty Bliss said she didn't see why girls couldn't be as smart detectives as anyone else. Anyway, on Wednesday Betty said to me, "The club will meet at your house tomorrow evening, Madge. Dot and I will come over after dinner." "Betty, we can't," I told her. "I'm very sorry, but Father and Mother are taking me to the concert tomorrow night. Let's skip this one meeting." "No," Betty said, "we've got to have a meeting tomorrow. If we begin skipping meetings, we'll soon stop having meetings. Then our club will become a failure. We can meet after lunch tomorrow." "That will be all right," I said. "I'll tell Dot. On my front porch at 1 o'clock. Is that okay, Chief?" "Okay, Inspector," Betty said, and at 1 o'clock Thursday Dot and Betty and I were all on our porch, ready for our club meeting. The only reason we were not beginning right off was that Dick Prince and Arthur Dane had come up the walk and were laughing at us as usual about girls trying to be detectives. They got a lot of fun out of that. "Now, please," Betty begged, "go away and let us have our meeting. Come back in half an hour if you want to. By that time you'll have the missing papers and the victim will be identified and the murderer in prison, I suppose." Dick Prince laughed. "Come away, Art, and let these female Sherlocks use their brains. We'll go talk to Silas." Well, Silas is the colored man who cuts the lawns for everybody on our block and here and there in our part of town. He was pushing his lawnmower, cutting our grass down near the front walk. Dick and Arthur started to go to him, but just then my father came out of the house. He had had his lunch and was going back to his store downtown. The boys stopped to say hello to him. "How are you, boys?" my father said, standing at the top of the porch steps while he lighted a cigar. Silas came across the lawn to the foot of the steps. He held his cap in his hand, and he grinned rather nervously. "Excuse me, boss," he said to father, "but could you let me have $2? You owe me $1 from the last time I cut the grass, and this time will be another $1. That's $2. I wouldn't ask you for payment, boss. But Daniel Webster Washington Smith wants me to pay him $5 that I owe him. He came round to my house last night, but I haven't got any money for him." "Certainly you can have $2, Silas," my father said. "And where is Daniel Webster Washington Smith? He doesn't seem to be helping you today." Silas was having so many lawns to cut this year that he had to have someone to help him, so he had this boy, Daniel Webster Washington Smith, work with him. "I suppose Daniel Webster went fishing today," Silas grinned. "At least he said last night how he and some other boys were going fishing today." "Yes, sir." Well, father had put his hand in his pocket, but he pulled it out again empty. For a moment he looked puzzled. "Oh," he said then, "I thought I had $2 in my pocket, but I gave it to your mother, Madge. I'll tell you what you can do, Madge, drive down to the store a few minutes after I leave, and I'll give you the money for Silas." "All right, father," I said. I offered to get the car and drive father down, but he said he preferred to walk on such a fine day, and he did. So I said we could all drive down as soon as we girls had held our club meeting. Dick Prince and Arthur Dane went with Silas and lay on the grass talking to him while he pushed the mower back and forth. Our club meeting did not last long because we had had no crimes that week. The minutes of the meeting that I wrote in the club record book were these: the 10th Street Detective Club met and Superintendent Bliss presided. Inspector D. Carver reported that there were no mysteries just now. Inspector M. Turner said that, if the club didn't have anything else to do, it might help her find the car keys she lost. Superintendent Bliss said lost keys were not a mystery unless there was a crime. The meeting stopped because Inspector M. Turner had to go downtown. As soon as we stopped the meeting, I called to the boys, and they got up off the grass and came to the porch. They talked to Betty and Dot while I went to the house to borrow Mother's car keys because mine were lost. Then we all walked around our house to our garage, and I unlocked the door and opened it. "Well, thank goodness for that," Betty said as I swung the first half of the door open. "What are you thanking goodness for?" I asked her. "I'm thankful that somebody oiled the door hinges," Betty said. "Those hinges have been making a noise like an angry cat." I knew that. Many a night when father and mother had been out somewhere with the car, I had been awakened when they came home. It was always the same noise, thump, as father got out of the car and slammed the car door, and then squeak squawk as he closed one half of the garage door, and squawk squeak as he closed the other half. Now the one half of the garage door had opened silently. I looked at the hinges and saw where oil had been used, plenty of it, and quite recently. "I suppose father got tired of the squeak," I said. "He thinks of oiling things if you give him time." Dick Prince had taken hold of the other wing of the door, and he swung that half open now. It made the same strange noise that it had always made. "Your father must have run out of oil before he got to this half," Dick said with a laugh. I guess he got tired, Artane said, also laughing. There's plenty of oil in the can. He had picked up a small oil can that was standing on a pile of 10 or 12 bricks at the side of the garage. The pile of bricks had been there for years, I suppose. I can't remember when they were not there. He shook the can, and there certainly was oil in it. He said he might as well finish the job, and he closed that wing of the door again and oiled the lower hinge, but he was not tall enough to reach the upper hinge. He looked around for something to stand on and saw the pile of bricks. He was just about to take a couple of them when Betty Bliss stopped him. "Wait a minute," she ordered. "I want to look at those bricks, Art." "What now?" Art asked, grinning at her. "Is old Detective Betty Bliss on the job again? Does the nose of the Sherlock of 10th Street smell a crime?" "What is it, Betty?" I asked. "What did you think you saw?" "Oh, nothing, I guess," Betty said. "It doesn't matter." She did not care to have the boys laughing at her and the detective club, and I did not blame her. Art piled a couple of bricks and stood on them and oiled the upper hinge. He put the bricks back on the pile and swung the half door open. It did not squeak now, and we all went into the garage. Now, our car is one of the low-priced cars, and 2 or 3 years old. It is what is called a four-door car. I went to the forward door on the driver's side and was just about to open it and get in when Dick Prince called to me. "Say, Madge," he said, "here's the bad news. You've got a flat tire." "Oh?" I cried, for if there is anything I hate, it is to find a tire flat just when I am ready to go somewhere. "Well, we'll have to take it off and put on the spare, that's all." Art was already taking off his coat. He walked to where the spare tire was fastened on the back of the car and hung his coat on a nail. The spare tire was brand new. Father had got it a day or two before because all our tires were pretty well worn, and he expected one or another of them to blow out any time. We needed a whole new set, but you know how scarce money is sometimes. So Artane began to take the new spare tire from the rack that held it at the back of the car. It was easy enough because the lock there was broken, and the spare could be lifted off without difficulty. Dick was rolling up his sleeves and hunting up tools, getting ready to jack up the axle, and Betty was just standing. There was nothing she needed to do, because the two boys were quite able to change a tire. Suddenly Betty bent down. "Madge," she said, "look at this tire, will you? This is funny, isn't it?" "What's funny?" I asked. "A flat tire is the last thing in the world I'd call funny, Betty." "Call it strange, then," Betty said. "Look at the size of the hole in this tire. That was a blowout, Madge, not a slow leak." "Well, what of it, Betty?" "Why, this seems strange to me," Betty said. "You see the dry mud that is still on this flat tire? It is grayish, isn't it? And look at that other tire, the dry mud on it is brownish, like clay. Now, how would one tire have one kind of mud, and the tire right in front of it have another kind of mud? Well, and look here, see how easily this gray mud flakes off the flat tire? There's none of it from the garage door to here, and there ought to be if this tire rolled in while on the car. And look at the floor under this axle. I'd say that a jack had been used there to raise the axle, and that it had been used quite recently." "What is it?" Dick asked, coming to see what we were talking about. But now that Betty had called my attention to the tire, I saw something too. "But, Betty," I cried, "Betty, that's not one of our tires. That's a W&P tire, and we've never had anything but Crescenta tires. We never had anything but Crescenta tires on this car." Betty stood up now and brushed her fingers together to get rid of the dust, and she looked at Dick and Art with a smile. "I'm very sorry, Dick," she said, "but I'm afraid we girls will just have to be detectives for a little while. It's terribly silly of us, isn't it? But you'll forgive us for being so childish, won't you? You see, Dick, tires just don't change from one kind to another, do they? No? Well, maybe Madge's father changed the tires," Dick said. "Such things have happened. Did he have the car out last night, Madge?" "Yes," I had to admit. "He went to the movies with Mother." They came home about 10:30 after I was in bed. I remember because I heard the car door slam and the garage doors creak. There, you see, said Dick. He had the car out and had a flat tire and changed to this one. When he had a new one he could have changed to, asked Betty. That won't do, Dick. I'm afraid, Madge, we'll have to be the detective club for a while, even if the boys do laugh at us. Yes, Superintendent Bliss, I said with a salute. Quite so, Superintendent Bliss. And what is your theory of this affair, Superintendent Bliss? Arthur, said Betty, ignoring my question for a moment. Will you look outside and tell me what you see on the ground near the garage door, near the one that was already oiled, not the one you oiled? Or is that too silly for you to do? If it is, I will send Inspector Dorothy Carver. I don't have to look, Art said. I know what is there, 3 bricks. I saw them before I came in. He saw 3 bricks, Inspector Madge, Betty said. I think that completes the evidence that a crime was committed. The only thing we need to discover now is who stole the tire off this wheel and put this old one in its place. Now, Dick Prince objected. Just wait a minute. Not so fast, Betty. Superintendent Bliss, if you please, Mr. Prince, Betty corrected him. Not so fast, Superintendent, Dick said. I don't admit that there has been a tire stolen. You'll have to show me. I may be stupid. Oh, now, Mr. Prince, I would not say that, said Betty, with a naughty smile. I wouldn't say you were stupid, only you do not observe carefully enough. All right, said Dick. Superintendent, tell me what you observed. It's so very simple, said Betty. You see it, of course, Inspector Madge. Well, I said doubtfully, because I did not see it all. I almost see it, Superintendent. Of course you do, Betty said. Last night when your father came back with the car and put it in the garage here, it was 10:30, and you say the garage doors creaked when he closed them. You said doors. You meant both doors? Yes, I agreed. I meant both doors. I heard one creak and then the other. I'm sure, because their creaks sounded different. You have the observing ear, Inspector, said Betty. So we know that neither door was oiled as late as 10:30 last night. Your father and mother came in as soon as the car was put away? Yes. I called and asked how the movie was. We'll not bother about that. But I think it is hardly likely that your father went out again just to oil one door, is it, Madge? If your father or anyone else who wanted to take the car out of the garage did not want the hinges to creak and waken anyone, Madge, he would have oiled all the hinges, wouldn't he? Of course, Superintendent, I said, laughing a little. But only the hinges of one door were oiled, said Betty, so whoever did oil the hinges must have thought that was enough. He did not want any creaking hinges that might waken you and give warning, but he did not think it necessary to oil the hinges of both doors. He meant to use only one door. He was not stealing the car, he was stealing one tire. So one door was all he needed to open. That sounds pretty, Dick said, but what of it? And I said, but, Superintendent, why should he steal an old worn tire when there was a new spare he could have taken? I'm coming to that, Betty said. We are trying to discover, from the clues we have, who entered this garage and stole a tire and left an old one in its place. We have more than enough clues, of course, to tell us who it was. We have? Dot asked. Do you mean, Superintendent, that you know who did it? Certainly, Inspector Carver, Betty said. And if you gave the clues proper attention, you would know, too. Or, at least, Inspector Madge would know. In the first place, it was a short person. We know that because he could not reach up to the upper hinge to oil it. He had to take 3 bricks from that pile that had not been moved for so long that dust was thick on top of the pile. He took the 3 bricks from the old pile, as I know, because the bricks now on top of the pile are not dusty, and put 1 brick on top of the other to stand on, so he could reach up to the top hinge of the door that had to be opened. So I say he was a short person. Yes, said Dick, pretending to be surprised. Go on. Wonderful, my dear Superintendent, said Arthur. What a brain. What a brain. Thank you, said Betty, smiling again. So what next? The criminal, having made sure the door would not creak and alarm anyone, entered the garage with this exploded tire on his shoulder and changed it for the tire that was on this wheel. He did not take the new tire that he could easily remove from the back of the car. Why didn't he? Well, why? I'll ask you, said Dick. 2 reasons, said Betty. The first was that he was not going far in his car. The second was that he had an old car, probably a noisy old car with badly worn tires. If he was a person who had not much money and whom everyone knew had not much money and he appeared with a brand new tire on his car, everyone would notice it. Someone would surely notice it, and when Madge's father told of the theft of a new tire, the thief would be immediately suspected. How do you know he wasn't going far? Art asked, for he was really interested now. What I mean, said Betty, is that he was not a person from some other town, or a person who was just stealing a tire to sell. If he was going far away, it would not make any difference if he did steal a new tire. No one here would see it. But the fact that he took an old tire that would probably match the other old tires on his car means that he expects to be around town with his car. He thought, obviously, that no one would notice the stolen tire on his car because it was old, and he thought Madge's father would believe this tire was just one of the old tires that had gone flat. He thought Madge's father would take off the old tire and throw it away and put on the new one and think no more about it. Betty, I cried. I mean Superintendent Bliss, I know who it was. I know who you mean. Do you? Betty asked, smiling at me, and I whispered in her ear. Keys was what I whispered. That's it, Betty told me, with a nod of her head, and then she went on explaining to the others. I think Madge has guessed it, she said. Because, you see, the thief must have been someone who was familiar with this car and knew the tires were the same size as his. He didn't break into your father's garage, Dick, because he knew your car has larger tires. He came right here and he knew the doors squeaked. He had the oil all ready to use. He knew this car had tires that were quite worn. I was practically jumping up and down because I was so excited. I had to put my hand over my mouth to keep from speaking out the name of the thief. So he was not just any thief, Betty went on, and he was not just a common tire thief. He was a special thief who knew all about this car and the garage and the tires on the car. So he must have been someone in this neighborhood or who came here rather often. Inspector Madge, you had to unlock the door just now to let us into the garage? Yes, Superintendent Bliss, I said. And the lock was not broken? And you had to borrow your mother's keys to unlock the door? Your keys were lost, were they not? Yes, I said. Where did you lose them, Inspector Madge? I don't know that, of course, I told Betty. Somewhere in the yard or out in front, because when I locked the garage that day I must have had them, but when I looked for them that evening they were gone, and I hadn't been anywhere. And your initials were on the key case? I know they were, because I gave you the key case on your birthday, said Betty. Anyone finding them would know they opened the garage. So, I know. Dot said now. I know, Superintendent. Silas. A good guess, except that Silas is tall enough to oil the hinge without standing on bricks, and that Silas would never steal anything, Betty said. I think it was someone who has been working all summer and who has saved enough to buy an old car. Someone who had a tire blowout yesterday evening and went to Silas to get some money that was due him so he could buy a second-hand tire. Someone who had promised to take some boys fishing in his car and just couldn't bear to hear them laugh at him because he couldn't keep his promise. Someone? Daniel Webster Washington Smith? Cried Dick and Art together. Well, said Betty, you might go and ask Silas if Dan has bought an old car. And he had. In a few minutes the boys came back and said that Daniel Webster Washington Smith had indeed bought an old car and that what he had wanted the money for was to buy a tire. So that almost proved that Betty was right, and the next day Dick and Art hunted up Daniel in his car, and there was the stolen tire. Well, Father did not send Daniel to prison. He talked to him, and Aniel told Silas to pay father the value of the tire out of the money that was coming to him, and Aniel swore he would never steal anything again, and I guess he hasn't. I said to Betty that I thought she had been very clever. A real detective couldn't have done any better, I said, and she raised her eyebrows and gave me quite a stare. Well, really, she cried. Really, Inspector? You surprise me. A real detective? What do you think I am, then? Three. The Boiled Ham Mystery. Our detective club was having its regular Thursday afternoon meeting in our yard, but it was not much of a meeting, because only 2 of us were there, and we had no mysteries to solve anyway. Dot Carver had been away with her family, visiting Dot's uncle, so Betty Bliss and I were alone. Well, Inspector, Betty said, there doesn't seem to be any crime today, so we might as well read a little more in The Mystery of Hedge Hill. That was the mystery story Betty's father had picked for us to read. When we had no crimes or mysteries of our own to solve, we took turns reading chapters of it at our meetings. So I found our place in the book, and I had just begun to read when Dot Carver came running into the yard. Girls, girls, she cried, almost out of breath. We've got a real crime. There were burglars at our house. They broke in while we were at Uncle George's. They broke the kitchen door open and stole a ham. A what? Betty asked. A ham, said Dot. A boiled ham, a whole boiled ham out of the refrigerator. Betty got to her feet. Inspectors, she said, this is a serious matter. We shall have to look into this. Was anything else taken, Inspector Carver? Well, I should say so, cried Dot. They almost emptied the refrigerator, and they took 3 cans of evaporated cream, and 5 cans of soup, and every bit of sugar we had in the house, and— You will make a list of the missing articles, Inspector Carver, Betty said. We have no time to lose now, we must go to the scene of the crime. There are 2 policemen there now, Dot said. Father telephoned the minute we got home. They are at a loss. At a what? I asked. At a loss, Dot repeated. Like all the policemen in the mystery books we have read. They can't find any clues, and they haven't an idea who the burglars were. They say they don't see much chance of ever discovering the criminals. They say that what was lost was all food, and the criminals will eat the food. If they had stolen jewels, it might be found, but when food is eaten, it is gone. There would be the evaporated cream cans, I suggested. They can't eat them. But what good are empty cans, when you haven't got them? Dot asked. There are thousands of empty tin cans. You can't prove anything by empty cans, especially when you don't know where they are. Betty Bliss was waiting impatiently. Hadn't we better stop arguing, and go to the scene of the crime without delay? She asked. What the police say, or think, does not interest us. So we went to Dot's house. The 2 policemen were still there, but they were just leaving, and it was easy to see they did not think there was much chance of discovering the burglars. Tramps, one of them said to the other, as they passed us on the way to their car, and probably 100 miles away by now. And that did seem possible and even likely, because the Carvers did not know when the burglary had taken place. They had been away several days, and the kitchen might have been broken into just after they left. It would have been perfectly easy for tramps to come to the back door and break in when they found no one at home. I told Betty so. She gave me a hard look. Inspector, she said, it is too early to form theories. Remember Rule 7 of the Detective Club. Facts first, theories later. There will be time enough for theories when we have gathered more facts. I said, I'm sorry, Superintendent, because every real detective knows it is silly to form theories until quite a lot of facts have been gathered and clues found, and we hadn't even looked for clues yet. If we are just going to say tramps every time we have a case, Betty said, we might as well not be a detective club. If tramps were guilty of this boiled ham crime, it is our duty to prove they were guilty and not just guess at it. So we went to work. Dot's father and mother were there, of course, but they did not make fun of us, as some grown-ups might have done. Go to it, girls, Mrs. Carver said. I think it was tramps, but see what you can discover. We'll never see that boiled ham again, that's been eaten by now, so there's no use offering a reward for its discovery in return. But I'll offer you $5 reward if you can show me who did steal the ham. Your club can buy books with the money. The kitchen door was open when you got home? Betty Bliss asked. Closed, but the lock broken off, said Mr. Carver. The screen door was broken open, and the wooden door was broken, as you can see. And perhaps this will be a lesson to my wife not to feed every tramp that comes to the door. You are altogether too kind-hearted, Millie. But, John, said Dot's mother, I just can't send hungry men away when we have food to spare, and times are so hard. Not all the men are lazy. So many of them want work and can't find it. You are a good woman, Millie, Mr. Carver said, but I don't like to have our house broken into, for all that. Betty Bliss had been examining the doors. Almost anything could have been used to break them, and there were no fingerprints. Of course, there were no footprints, because the burglar could have come to the door by the footpath without leaving any. And there was nothing stolen but food? Betty asked. Nothing, Dot's mother said. The thief doesn't seem to have gone anywhere but into the kitchen. Not a thing, but food was taken. Someone who was hungry, Betty said, but that's not much of a clue. Were there any signs that the thief ate anything while he was in the kitchen, Mrs. Carver? No, Dot's mother said. They just took. She stopped suddenly and cried, What is that child eating? Dot's baby brother, Eddie, was in a kitty coop out on the back porch. He was about 2 years old, and the back porch was where he played most of the time because it was clean and sunny. There was a rug for him to sit and roll on, and beyond the kitty coop, a box with a hinged lid to hold his toys when he was not using them. Mrs. Carver had left him there when they got home, and now Eddie was standing in the kitty coop, holding to the edge with one hand, and, in the other hand, he had a chicken bone, a leg bone, and he was chewing on it, although it had no meat. That dirty bone! Mrs. Carver cried, and she took the bone and threw it as far as she could. She wiped Eddie's hand and mouth, and gave him a toy cat from the box, and he never cried. Kiki, he said, trying to say kitty, and he hugged the toy cat, and then he said chiggy, but no one paid any attention to that. Where did he get that dirty bone? Mrs. Carver wondered. It does seem as if you had to watch a child every minute. What was it you asked me, Betty? Oh, yes, I was saying the thief did not stop to eat anything in the kitchen. He must have just gathered all he could put into a bag or something, and then hurried away. Betty checked the list of stolen articles, and then went into the food cupboard. I think it was one man working alone, Inspector Carver, she said to Dot. You will observe that a great many cans of food remain on the shelves. 2 men with 2 bags could have taken them. I think one man with 1 bag worked here. And not a very strong man, I said, or else he had a very small bag to store the food in. Perhaps he was weak from hunger, and not strong enough to carry much of a load. And he meant to come back, Dot suggested. Betty was looking at what remained on the shelves. She took down a large tin can, removed the lid, and looked into the can. Coffee, she said. A can full to the top with coffee. That's strange, Inspector. Why? What do you mean, Superintendent Bliss? I asked. I mean that it is strange, if the burglar was a tramp, that he did not take this coffee, Betty said, and she turned to Mrs. Carver. Perhaps you had some other coffee? She asked. No, Dot's mother said. We buy 1 can at a time, to have it fresh. That is all the coffee we had when we went away. I'm sure of that, Betty. I can't help thinking it is strange, Betty said, frowning a little. If the burglar was a tramp, why did he leave coffee? Coffee is the one thing a tramp would be sure to take. Coffee is a thing a tramp can always use. And he took sugar and evaporated cream, Betty. I mean, Superintendent, I said. Exactly so, Inspector, Betty agreed. A tramp would have taken the coffee. So what do you deduce from that? I don't know, I answered. What do I deduce from it, Superintendent? What I would deduce from it, Betty said, is that the thief must have been someone that already had enough coffee. He took sugar, and he took cream, and both of those are used with coffee, but he did not take coffee. If he had enough coffee at home, he must have had a home, and tramps don't have homes. Perhaps he drank only tea. Suggested. Don't be silly, Betty said. There was nothing more to investigate in the kitchen, and it did not seem to me that we had discovered much, except that the coffee had not been taken. So we went out on the back porch and looked again at the marks where the doors had been broken. Betty Bliss studied the marks for a long time. These marks don't mean anything to me, she said. Anyone could have made them. Well, Mr. Carver, who had been upstairs changing his clothes, came down then, and on his way out to the garage to attend to the car and get out the rest of the luggage, he stopped a moment. "How is it going, Super?" he asked. "Anything to report yet?" "I'm afraid not yet," Betty said. "We haven't had much time to think it over." I'll keep you informed, sir." So Mr. Carver said he wished us good luck, and he went to the garage. Dot was looking toward the empty grounds that spread out back of our row of houses. "There are Dick and Arthur," she said. She lifted her voice and shouted at them, and they turned and saw us. Dick raised his arm and waved at us, and Art called, "Hello. Come here," and I said, "Let's see what they are doing." Dot's mother came from the kitchen. "Wait, Dot," she said. "I want you to unpack the suitcases and change your dress before you go with the girls. She'll be with you in half an hour, Betty, or sooner." So Betty and I went out the back way and through the weeds to where the boys were. They had their air guns and had been shooting. "I thought this was your detective club meeting afternoon," Art said. "What's the matter? Why aren't you meeting? Did the club quit?" "It did not," Betty declared. "We were working on a case." She would have gone on to tell about it, I suppose, but my eye fell on the thing the boys had been shooting at. It was tied on the upper end of a tall plant, and was red and blue and green. "What on earth is that?" I asked, for it did not look like anything I had ever seen before. I walked toward it. "Hey, come away from that!" Dick shouted. "That's our target." But I wanted to see what it was, and Betty came with me. I guess she was curious, too. "Oh," I cried, taking the strange object in my hand. "It's a parrot." "It's a dead parrot," Betty cried. "It's a stuffed parrot," Art said. "Where's its head?" I asked. "It didn't have any head," Dick said. "That's all there was of it when we found it. I don't know that it ever had any head." "Certainly it did," Betty said. "Every parrot has a head. It had a head when it was stuffed. Who would stuff a parrot without a head?" "She's a regular Sherlock Holmes, isn't she, Dick?" Art laughed. "The minute she sees a headless parrot, she says, 'It had a head?' Wonderful brains these lady detectives have," Dick laughed. "Oh, stop it," Betty said. "You don't seem to have hit this very often." Then the four of us took turns shooting at the headless parrot, and we did hit it once in a while. Betty and I hit it as often as Dick and Art did too, and we were busy shooting when Dot came out of her yard. The moment she was near us, she saw the parrot. "Here!" she cried. "Stop that! Where did you get our parrot?" "What do you mean your parrot?" Art asked her. "That's Eddie's parrot, our baby's parrot," Dot said, taking it from the plant. "It belonged to great-grandmother Carver, and when it died she had it stuffed, years and years ago. Eddie plays with it. He loves it best of anything. He calls it his chiggy, his chicken." "Where's its head?" I asked Dot. "Head? It never had a head, not as long as I can remember." Dot was holding on to the headless parrot, as if she was afraid the boys might take it away from her. It surely was a crazy-looking bird, with no head, and its long tail feathers bent, and some of the stuffing sticking out at the neck. Betty Bliss stood there, looking at the stuffed parrot and frowning a little, as she always did when she was thinking hard. "Dick," she asked suddenly, "where did you find this parrot?" "Why, there," said Dick, pointing. "Right there in the path. It was just lying there, and I picked it up. Do you think I stole it?" "No, I don't," Betty answered, and she took the parrot from Dot. "It is dry now. Was it wet when you picked it up?" "No," said Dick, and he asked, "Why?" It rained yesterday morning. If the parrot had been in the path the night before last, it would be wet. But it is dry, so it must have been dropped there last night. Where did you keep the parrot? In the toy box on the back porch, told Betty. Always, so anyone could hand it to Eddie when he was put in the kitty coop. Why do you ask that, Betty? I'm thinking, I believe this parrot is a clue. Because if it isn't, I'd like you to tell me how it came to be out here on the path to Shantytown, when it ought to be in Eddie's toy box. Somebody took it, of course, I said. It certainly did not walk here, or fly here. All right, Inspector, agreed Betty in her most detective manner. Then tell me this, who would steal a poor old headless parrot like this? And if anyone was crazy enough to steal it, why would he throw it away where anyone could find it? He wouldn't do either, I said. But I'll tell you what might have happened, Art said. Some kid may have been playing around Dot's yard and opened that toy box. And he may have taken this bird and maybe kicked it up this path until he got tired of it and just left it where we found it. An 8 or 9-year-old boy? Betty asked. Well, maybe, Art said, not quite sure what Betty was getting at. How do I know how old he was? I know he wasn't a boy of that age, if I know anything about boys, Betty told him. A boy like that, after he had kicked the parrot around, would tear it open to see what was inside of it. They always do. And a girl would have taken it all the way home, because the feathers are pretty. And a man would not have stolen anything so worthless when there was a box full of good toys. Betty, I cried, you mean a baby took it? Well, there was the chicken bone in the kitty coop, Betty said. Dot's mother is the cleanest of all clean people. She would never let an old chicken bone be in Eddie's kitty coop, would she? She certainly would not, Dot declared. The rug and the floor of the porch have to be very clean before Mother will let Eddie play there. Why, she even washed the bars of the kitty coop itself after that other baby had been in it. Other baby? Betty Bliss asked sharply. What other baby? Why, Dot began, and then her eyes got very big. Betty, she cried, is that what you have been thinking all the while? Did you know there had been a Shantytown baby in that kitty coop, Gypsy Joe's baby? I don't know who Gypsy Joe is, Betty answered. I never heard of any Gypsy Joe. All I guessed was that whoever broke into your house had a baby with him or her, and that the baby was chewing on a chicken bone, and that the burglar put the baby in the kitty coop while he worked, and gave the baby this old parrot to keep it quiet. But that would be Gypsy Joe, Dot cried. He lives in Shantytown, and last week he did come to our house by this path, and he did bring his baby because his wife is very, very sick. He asked for work, Betty, and Mother let him beat our rugs, and he did put his baby in Eddie's kitty coop while he worked. Yes, Mother did give the baby the parrot to play with that day, because the poor child cried. How long ago was that? It was just before we went on this trip, Dot said. And then, oh, how terrible! Mother told Gypsy Joe he could come back yesterday for the pay, because she had no small bills the day he was here, only $10, and we were not home when he came. Nobody remembered a thing about it. Betty, did Gypsy Joe steal that ham? Betty nodded. She didn't look very happy over her findings. We all went back to Dot's house then, and we caught Mr. Carver just as he was getting into his car to go downtown for sugar and evaporated cream and, I suppose, a ham. Betty told him what we had discovered, and Mr. Carver had us all get into his car. We were a little crowded in the car, but we did not mind that. Mr. Carver drove to Shantytown and found the hut Gypsy Joe lived in, and he went inside while we waited in the car. When he came out, he looked very serious. He confessed, he said. I saw the ham, what is left of it. We won't say anything to the police about this, Betty, I guess. It was our fault, anyway, for forgetting to pay Gypsy Joe before we went away. He's a sick man, besides, Gypsy Joe is, and that wife of his is very, very sick. The fellow was hopeless, I think. He broke down and wept, Betty. It is his first law breaking, he says. Oh, said Betty. So we'll let him off this time, if it is all the same to you, Superintendent said Mr. Carver. Well, of course, we just detect for fun, Betty told him. That may be, Mr. Carver answered. You don't mind if I drive around by my doctors, do you? I'd like to have him take care of that woman. And I want to send them a few groceries. She shouldn't be eating ham. And here's your $5 reward. You earned it. When Mr. Carver went in to see the doctor, Dick Price, who had laughed at our detective club, spoke up. Betty, he said, I'll say you are not so bad at this detective business. How about letting Art and me join the detective club? And was Betty proud? Oh, girl. Four. The White Rabbit Mystery. We girls called our detective club the 10th Street Yard because we live on 10th Street. There were just 3 of us at first, Betty Bliss and Ott Carver and I. We got up the club to do detecting, if there was any detecting to do, and to read good detective novels to each other when there were no crimes for us to solve, which was pretty often. There were a few crimes, though, and Betty Bliss was a wonder as a detective, even if she was only a girl, and that was how Dick Prince and Arthur Dane, who laughed at us a lot at first, came to ask if they could join our detective club too. I suppose they thought they were smarter than Betty and would show us a few things. Our detective club met on Thursday afternoons, and Thursday had not come around since we said the boys could join the club. It was Saturday morning in winter, and Ott and I had stopped at Betty Bliss's house with our skates. Betty came out with her skates. Art Dane is going with us, she said. He telephoned over, and I said we would stop at his house for him. Where's Dick Prince? Dot asked. Why doesn't he come with us too? Dick has gone hunting, Betty said. His father gave him a gun for his birthday, and Dick went hunting with Jed Sylvan in the woods. They're going to try to get some rabbits. So that was that. We walked as far as Art Dane's house, and I called, and he came out with his skates over his shoulder. Hello, he said. How are all the lady detectives? Any more crimes? Not a crime, Betty Bliss laughed. You can't expect one every day, Art, can you? We can be detectives all the time. If you were detectives, Art said, maybe you could help me. A couple of my rabbits got away last night. None of you saw anything of a couple of white rabbits, did you? We hadn't, of course, and we said so, and as far as I was concerned, I was ready to forget Art's white rabbits and go skating, but Betty Bliss asked Art a question. How do they get away? I thought you were always so careful to fasten the cages. I must have left the lid of that cage open. I went out and gave them some cabbage leaves after supper last night. I thought I closed the lids, but maybe I didn't. Are you going to look for them? Betty asked. I did look, Art said. I looked all through the yards around here, but not a hair of a rabbit. No tracks? Betty asked, for a half-inch or so of snow had fallen during the night. Not a track, Art answered. Not a sign of them. Maybe they were stolen, Betty went on. I should think tame rabbits would not go far. They would leave tracks somewhere. She handed her skates to Art. Come on, she said, starting into the yard. I'm going to have a look at the cages. This may be a job for us, girls. We went around the house and into the backyard where Art kept his rabbits, in cages. It was an open shed with no front to it, and the cages, 6 or 8 of them, were all against the back wall, some piled on top of others. They all had rabbits in them except one cage, the one from which the white rabbits were missing. That cage stood on a table by itself, something like a kitchen table, but homemade. How many white rabbits were there? Betty asked, looking into the empty cage. 2. Just a pair, Art told her. Full grown. They were not stolen. They got out. I must have left the slide open. Don't waste your time. Let's go skating. But Betty was studying the cage. Dot and I, of course, were looking at it too, but I couldn't see any way to tell whether the rabbits had been stolen or just got out and run away. All there was, as far as I could see, was the empty cage. It was a box with wire screen on the front and one side, and a sleeping place at one end. "They were stolen," Betty Bliss announced. "This is a case for us, ladies." She said it in the most positive way. "I don't see it," Art argued. "If you can tell, by looking at that cage, that those rabbits were stolen, I'll say you are a wonder." "You are a member of the 10th Street Yard now, Inspector Dane," Betty said, "and you must speak more respectfully to your superintendent. I do not care to have the members of my force call me a wonder when I am working on a case. May I ask you to look at that rabbit cage, Inspector Dane?" "Yes, Superintendent," grinned Art, and I could see he was not taking Betty seriously. "I am looking at it. Give your attention to the fastening." We all looked at the fastening when Betty called our attention to it in this way. The lid, or door, of the cage was a single board made to slide in and out between grooves on the top of the box. It was open now, pulled out so that even extra big rabbits could have jumped out through the opening. But what we looked at was the fastening. This was a piece of leather strap nailed on the slide, and there was a nail standing half an inch high in the top of the box, over which a hole in the strap could be put. This held the slide closed when it was closed, but now the slide was pulled out almost as far as it would go. "Was the slide open like that when you came out this morning, Inspector?" Betty asked Art. "Yes," said Art doubtfully, "I think so." And then he said quite positively, "Yes, I know it was. That's why I thought I must have left it open last night. Yes, it was open." "And the fastening, Inspector? I asked you to give that your attention." Art came closer to the cage and took the end of the leather strap in his fingers. "Well, say," he cried, and he looked at Betty with a grin. "You sure got sharp eyes, Betty." And then he said in a hurry, "I mean Superintendent." We all looked at the strap closely, and it was easy to see that the leather had been broken through at one side where the hole was. "I don't suppose you did that, Inspector Dane?" Betty asked. "When you pull out that slide to feed your rabbits, you don't usually pull it hard and break the fastener, do you? You didn't do that last night, did you?" "I did not," declared Art. "So we see," said Betty, "that someone opened that slide in a hurry, and probably in the dark. Someone, most likely, who did not know there was a fastener on the slide. He pulled at the slide and broke the fastener. In other words, Inspector, a thief took your rabbits." "Well," said Arthur. "But if that is not enough proof," said Betty, "look at the straw in the bottom of the cage. I don't suppose you pushed all the straw up in one corner, did you, Inspector?" "Certainly not," said Art. "But it is all pushed into one corner," Betty pointed out. "And how would that happen? I have picked up tame rabbits by the ears, and you and I know what they do when they are lifted. They kick, struggle, and kick. If your rabbits had jumped out of the open box, they would not have disturbed the straw much. When the thief lifted them, they kicked, and they kicked the straw into a pile. Are you satisfied now that someone took the rabbits, Inspector?" "Yes, I am," grinned Arthur. "Anyway, it looks that way." "Because if you are not," said Betty, "you can look at the cabbage leaves in this cage. You said you came out after supper last night and gave the rabbits cabbage leaves. Did you give all your rabbits cabbage leaves?" "Yes, all of them," Arthur admitted. "You can see, then," said Betty, pointing at the other cages, "that all the cabbage leaves have been eaten except those in this cage. I ask you, Inspector, if these white rabbits are different from your black rabbits, and your black and white rabbits, and your blue rabbits? Don't they like cabbage leaves as much as the other rabbits do?" "Of course," Art laughed. "I see what you mean. The white rabbits wouldn't have jumped out of the cage until they had eaten the cabbage leaves, or at least most of them. And they did not eat much of the leaves. So they must have been stolen out of the cage before they had a chance to eat the cabbage leaves." "You are clever, Inspector," said Betty, but it did not sound exactly like a praise. "You grasp facts quickly when you finally see them. We will admit, then, that a crime has been committed here and that the white rabbits were stolen. Everything shows that, including the fact that you could find no rabbit tracks in the snow that fell during the night. Stolen rabbits would not make tracks in the snow. So now we will decide when they were stolen. Before the snow fell last night, said Art quickly. I know that, because there were no tracks in the snow when I came out here this morning, no footprints. We can set the time a little closer than that, I think, Betty said. We know that the rabbits were here when you came out to give them the cabbage leaves last night. What time was that? After supper. About 7:30. It was dark. I used my flashlight. Rabbits awake? Oh, yes. It wasn't quite that dark. Said Betty thoughtfully. You gave the white rabbits their cabbage leaves last, didn't you? Yes, but how did you know that? They would have eaten more of the leaves if they had been fed first. You'll notice the leaves in their cage are hardly touched. That means that the thief was here very soon after you were. The rabbits had no time to eat much. Possibly the thief was hiding here in the shed when you were here. But, no, there is no place where a person could hide. Then you mean, Superintendent, I said, that the thief came and took the rabbits almost as soon as Arthur went back to the house? It would seem so from the clues we have noticed, Betty said, unless Inspector Dane is trying to play a trick on us and knows where the rabbits are and put them there himself. And if you are trying to do that, Art Dane, we'll never speak to you again, as long as we live, will we, girls? Oh, now, Superintendent Bliss, I said, that's not fair to Inspector Dane. He didn't even say the rabbits were stolen. He said they got away. Nobody would ever have thought they were stolen if you hadn't suggested it. I'm most certainly not playing a trick on you, Art declared. Then they were stolen, said Betty positively. Someone came and took the rabbits just after you were here in the shed. Now the question is who took them. Art Dane laughed again. Listen, he said. I believe now that they were stolen. You've shown me proof enough of that. But don't pretend you can tell us who did steal them unless you knew before you came here. You're not going to say there are clues right here before our eyes to tell us who the thief was, are you? No, Betty said slowly. No, I don't believe there are clues here to tell us that. And, after all, a clue isn't supposed to tell us much. A clue is a thread that leads us somewhere. A clue doesn't talk, it shows the way to something. She was looking around, turning her head this way and that way, looking at the cages, and the walls, and the floor. The cage the white rabbits had been in was at one end of the shed, farther from the door than most of the other cages, and it was on a table as I have already said. This box, Betty asked suddenly, nodding to a wooden box that was partly under the table. Was it always pulled out from under the table like this? No, Art said, looking at the box in his turn. It was always pushed in under the table. Someone has pulled it out. To stand on, said Betty. Someone must have pulled it out to stand on, to be able to reach into the cage to get the rabbits. Is there any other reason it should be pulled out like this? No, Superintendent, said Art. There was nothing in it. It looks to me, said Betty, as if whoever took the rabbits was short. Even I could reach into the cage without standing on the box, any of us could. So if whoever took the rabbits had to stand on this box, he must have been a small boy. Does that sound sensible, Inspector Carver? Dot had said almost nothing so far, and neither had I, because we were so interested in Betty and her detective work, and anyway Betty and Art had hardly given us a chance. But now Dot did speak up. Betty, she cried. First Dot's face showed that she was surprised. Then she had a shocked look, as if she really couldn't believe what she was thinking. Then her face had a look of pleasure. Betty, she cried again. I know who stole the rabbits. I'm just sure I know. I'm positive I know. Who was it? Betty asked. No, I won't tell you, Dot said. It wouldn't be fair. It would be too simple. Because I ought to have known all along. It wouldn't be detective work, it would just be telling you right out who took them. Do you mean, Carver, I asked, that you have known all the while who took those rabbits? No, said, I didn't know. Or I did know, but I didn't have brains enough to see. I mean, I'm almost sure I know. I'm just positive I know who took the rabbits. She giggled. But I didn't guess until Superintendent Bliss gave me a hint, she went on. It just couldn't be anyone else. The thief almost told me the rabbits were going to be stolen, almost told me. Who was it? Art asked. That wouldn't be fair, giggled again. Maybe I'm not right, but I think I am, and if I told you who it was, we wouldn't have any more work to do on this case, and it is a lovely mystery. I'll write the name, if you want me to, but you must not look at it until the case is solved. It may never be solved, if you don't tell us, I said. Yes, it will, Inspector Madge, declared. But, if Superintendent Bliss doesn't solve it, I just know that the case will be cleared up this evening. I just know it. How so? Art asked, looking puzzled. He is a very good-looking boy, and the puzzled look made him look even nicer. How will it be cleared up? I hate to say, again and again, that giggled, but that is exactly what she did do. The thief will bring the rabbits back, she said. She was thinking something was very funny. At least, if I'm right, the thief will. Who has a pencil? Art had a pencil, but he had no paper, and neither had any of us, so tore a piece of label off one of the cages to write on. The cage had been a packing box before Art made a cage of it. The piece of paper was small, with hardly enough room to write anything on, but went to the other end of the shed, and wrote the name on the paper, and folded it once, and then again. It was not much bigger than the end of her thumb when it was folded. Who'll keep it? She asked, and we said she had better give it to Art, because he had pockets. He promised not to look at it, or show it to any of us. When can we look at it? Betty asked. Not until tonight, said, or until the thief brings the rabbits back. 8 o'clock tonight, they'll be back then, if they are coming back. Well, say, Art said. This is the strangest thing I ever did hear of. What do you mean, Did the fellow just borrow my rabbits? No, said. They were stolen. The thief meant to keep them, but will not keep them. I give it up, Art said. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm sorry, said I think Superintendent Bliss ought to go ahead with her detective work now. It would be a wonderful success if she could solve the mystery of the white rabbits by clues and induction. We will carry on, inspectors, said Betty, although I do think we have every right to know what Inspector Carver knows. But we can use what Inspector Carver knows tonight, if the case is not solved by then. My last induction, I believe, was that the thief was a small boy. Okay, said Art. If he pulled that box out to stand on, he was a small boy, and I guess that is what he did. Now the question is, what small boy? Can you tell us that, Superintendent? Betty did not. We hunted everywhere for more clues, but there just were not any. At last even Betty gave it up. That's as far as I can go, she said. It was a small boy, and Art should know what small boys know. He has rabbits. Inspector Dane, make a list of all the small boys who might have stolen the rabbits, and go to see them. Well, that is good detective work too, and in real life, a lot of it has to be done, but this was Saturday afternoon and the skating was good. Tomorrow, Superintendent, Art begged. Just now something tells me we are missing some good skating. Those rabbits will keep, and if the snow melts, the skating won't. So let's go skating. We did, but we agreed to meet at Art's house at 8 o'clock to see whether Dot's guess was right or wrong, and at 8 Betty and Ott and I rang the Danes' bell. Art opened the door, and he was one big grin from ear to ear. The rabbits came home, he said. Jed Sylvan brought them home 15 minutes ago. He had a sack of rabbits in one hand, and little Susie Sylvan in the other. I was right, cried Dot, clapping her hands. Did you look at the name I wrote, Art? Did you? Yes, he said, digging it out of his pocket. There it is, Susie Sylvan. And the poor kid begged my pardon? I'm ashamed to tell you how simple it was, Dot said, when we were inside. You know that Jed is always hunting and has a lot of skins on his shed wall to dry, rabbit and fox skins. And Mrs. Sylvan comes around doing chores. My little sister, Doris, has a coat with a white rabbit fur collar, and yesterday when Mrs. Sylvan came to the house, she brought Susie. And Susie admired Doris's collar, said Betty. Yes, agreed Dot, and she said, I'm going to have a rabbit fur collar on my coat too. I am. I know where I can get a rabbit fur collar for my coat. My papa can make me a rabbit fur collar, he can. And when I said it was a small boy, I thought of a small girl, smiled Dot. And I wondered why a small girl should take white rabbits when the others were closer to hand, nearer the door. So, of course, I guess that Susie Sylvan wanted white rabbit skin. And, of course, I knew that Jed Sylvan would make her bring the rabbits back as soon as he got home. Little Susie took the rabbits last night. Why didn't her father make her bring them home then? Dot looked puzzled. Art laughed. Don't cry, Inspector, he said. Jed wasn't home. He went out hunting yesterday afternoon, and little Susie left the rabbits in their woodshed. Superintendent, does Inspector Dot deserve a piece of chocolate cake? I shall mention in my report, said Betty, that she deserves an extra large piece. And I'd like a big piece too, she added quickly. "5. The 39 Dimes Mystery." The book we were reading was The Mystery of Hedge Hill. I had just read a chapter aloud and handed the book to Dot Carver, and she had begun the next chapter. Detective Fell bent down and picked up a white feather from the edge of the rug. Ah, a feather from the breast of a white pigeon, he cried. Suddenly the telephone rang, and Dot jumped up and went to answer it. We were having a meeting of our detective club at Dot's house, and we had no crimes to detect, so we were reading a detective mystery. We three girls, Betty, Bliss and Dot and I, had formed the detective club because we thought girls could detect as well as anybody, and we called ourselves the 10th Street Yard because that was as near as we could come to Scotland Yard, the famous London detective headquarters. We all lived on 10th Street. At first Dick Prince and Arthur Dane, the boys who lived close to us on 10th Street, laughed at us, but when we had solved a couple of mysteries they stopped making fun of us, and we let them be members of the club too. The only reason they were not with us was that Dick Prince was going downtown to buy a tennis racket, and Art Dane was going with him to pick it out. Art knew more about rackets than Dick did. Anyway, Dot came back from the telephone all excited. Girls, she cried, no more reading. That was Dick Prince telephoning. A crime has been committed at his house. A mystery for us to solve? I asked, jumping up. Well, no, Madge, Dot said, quieting down a little. Just a crime, not a mystery, but Dick thought we'd like to know about it. He says they know who did it. Betty was interested. What was the crime? She asked. Money was stolen, Dot said. $4, I think Dick said. Arthur Dane is over there now. The money was Dick's. Who stole it, did he say? Betty Bliss asked. He said Sophia, their colored maid, Dot answered. Betty turned and looked at her. Dick said that? She asked. Then there is a mystery for us to solve, Dot. Sophia Backus never stole anything, and she never would. She worked for us for years and years before she went to the Princes, and she is very honest. Come on, girls, it is time 10th Street Yard was on the job. Right you are, Superintendent, I said, and we all hurried over to Dick's house. Art was in the living room and Dick let us in there and closed the door. I thought you'd like to hear about it, Dick said, and I'm sorry there's no mystery to solve. Sophia took the money. She almost said so. What did she say? Asked Betty Bliss, looking thoughtful. Nothing, said Dick. That's just it. She won't say a word. Father's not home, he doesn't come home for lunch, but Mother asks Sophia 100 questions, and she just won't give any answer, but I don't want to say, Mrs. Prince. Mother asked her, did you take the money? And all she would say was, "I don't want to say, Mrs. Prince." "How much money was it?" Betty asked. Dot said $4. "Well, I called it $4, Dick answered. "It was $4, but I took out a dime a couple of days ago, so it was really $3.90. It was my dimes, the dimes I had been collecting." "Oh, I know," I said. "The collection of dimes of all different dates that you were making a couple of years ago. You showed them to Dot and me once, don't you remember?" "That's right," Dick said. "I got an 1893 dime once, and I thought I would see if I could get all the dates, and I did, from 1893 for 40 years, until I stopped collecting." "When did you stop collecting?" Betty asked him. "A couple of years ago," Dick said. "I just forgot to keep on." "Well, Inspector," Betty Bliss announced, for she called us all that, when we were working on a mystery, "I can't believe that Sophia committed this crime. She is in great need of money," Dick told us. "Her husband is ill in bed. She has been asking Mother to advance money on her wages. And Mother did let her have all she could spare." Betty Bliss did not pay much attention to this. "Where was the money?" she asked. "I always kept it in a box in my desk, up in my room," Dick told her. "A couple of days ago I needed a dime, and I got out the box and took one from it. I left the box on top of my desk. It was there yesterday morning. I remember seeing it." "Was it there last night?" Betty asked. "I didn't notice," Dick said. "Yesterday Mother and Father and I drove up to Jeffersonville to see Aunt Jenny, and it was almost midnight when we got home, and I got into bed without noticing much of anything." "And when did you know the money was gone?" Betty asked. "Did you just find it out?" "About an hour ago. I was going to buy a tennis racket, and I did not have enough money, so I was going to use those dimes. Art came over, and he and I went up to my room, and the money was gone. We looked everywhere, but no money." "And what did you do then?" Superintendent Bliss spoke in her most Scotland Yard way, just like in detective stories. "I told Mother and she looked, and then she asked Sophia, and I'll say that Sophia looked guilty. She would not say a thing. All she would say was, 'I don't want to say, Mrs. Prince.' She acted guilty, all right," said Art Dane. "I was there." "Have you looked among Sophia's things?" Betty asked, after a moment. "No, I don't believe Mother would do that until Father came home," Dick said. "It would not be hard to hide the box, anyway. It was a small box." "What kind of box was it?" asked Betty. "Sherlock Holmes on the job, aren't you?" laughed Dick. "It was a cigar box, a Keno little cigars box. About so big, just big enough to hold 40 dimes, with some cotton to keep them bright." "Dick Prince," I said, "have you been smoking little cigars? For Keno little cigars are about the size of cigarettes, and I don't like boys who smoke." "No, I haven't, Madge," Dick answered seriously, "because he does like me pretty well. It's the kind my father smokes. I used one of his empty boxes." Then he asked Betty, "Anything else, Superintendent?" "No, Inspector," Betty told him. "We would like to look at the scene of the crime, and then I would like to question Sophia, if she does not mind." Well, I felt proud of Betty. It was just like a real detective story, the way she asked questions. Dick opened the living room door and we were just going into the hall when we saw Sophia going out of the front door. "Where is she going?" Betty asked sharply as the front door closed behind Sophia. "I don't know," Dick said. "She said she had to go out for half an hour or so. She asked Mother if she might go." "Madge," said Betty. "Or no, you, Inspector Dot, follow Sophia. Watch her carefully, and don't lose sight of her. I want to know where she goes, and what she does." When we got to the top of the stairs, on the way to Dick's room, his mother was standing there. "Oh, Betty," she said, "I've heard of some of the wonderful things your detective club has done, and I do hope you can get at the truth of this, but I'm afraid you can't. I don't know whether to send for the police or not, for Sophia is acting so strangely. I don't know what to make of it, I'm sure." I wouldn't call in the police yet, Betty said. You can always do that, you know, Mrs. Prince. And may I ask you something? Was Sophia here all alone yesterday? Alone? Repeated Mrs. Prince, as if the question surprised her. Why, yes, as far as I know. She was to clean my room and the living room, and wash as many windows as she could. How many windows did she get washed? Betty asked. Why, all of them, answered Mrs. Prince. She did them all, Betty. That's a good many windows to do in a day, said Betty, besides cleaning 2 rooms and the other work, isn't it? Why, yes, said Mrs. Prince. Yes, it is. It's more than Sophia usually gets done. You don't mean, I don't know that I mean anything, said Betty, but I remember that, when Sophia worked for us, and had windows to do, she always had her husband come and do the outsides. That was before he fell ill, of course. Probably Sophia will tell us whether Erastus was here or not. She did not say why she wanted to go out just now, did she, Mrs. Prince? No, Mrs. Prince said. She just asked if she could go out, and I told her she could. So Betty said we would look at Dick's room, and we went there. Betty stopped us at the door. She was in front, with Dick and Art and me just behind her. She glanced here and there, and then walked toward the desk at the far side of the room and bent down, and looked closely at the floor. Dick, Betty asked, do you ever smoke cigarettes? Never, said Dick. I never smoke anything. You know Erastus pretty well. Does he smoke? Betty asked. Cigarettes? Yes. Why? Dick asked her. There are cigarette ashes here by the desk, Betty said. And your windows have been cleaned, inside and out. If Erastus was here yesterday helping Sophia, these ashes may be an important bit of evidence. I think, Inspector Madge, Betty said to me, we are getting a little forward with this case. Yes, Superintendent Bliss, I answered, and Betty took an envelope from Dick's desk and put the cigarette ashes into it. I was pleased to think how clever Betty was. I was glad to believe Sophia was not guilty. We all liked her. But Betty was not through with the room. She made us search it thoroughly while she stood and watched. The bed was a single bed because only Dick slept in it. The desk stood beside the bed, and there were a bookcase and chairs. I searched every inch of the desk, every drawer and box, but the money was not there, not a sign of it. As we were going downstairs again, Mrs. Prince came to the door of her room. Did you discover anything? She asked. I'll say so, Dick said. Cigarette ashes on the floor. It looks as if Erastus was here yesterday, and in my room. Oh dear, cried Mrs. Prince. That is almost as bad as if Sophia had taken the money herself. She is so proud of that boy. Well, we went down to the living room, and Betty sent Dick and Arthur out to see if they could find a cigarette end below any of the windows where Erastus might have dropped one, but they came back and said it was impossible to be sure. There were bushes under most of the windows. They had not found an end. And then Sophia came home. She went right through the hall and up the stairs to the 3rd floor where her room was. Dot came in almost immediately after Sophia. She was very much excited, and she closed the living room door. I followed her, Dot told us, and I guess now you'll say she is guilty. She went to 2 places. First she went to the bank, and I looked through the window to see what she was doing. She gave the teller a $5 bill and got a lot of money, dimes, I think. Then she went into the tobacco store next door, and what do you think she bought? A box of Kino Little cigars, of course, said Betty. Yes. How did you ever guess it? Dot asked. If she got dimes at the bank, Betty said, of course she would want a Kino Little cigar box to put them in. She is up in her room now, putting the dimes in the box. Before long she will come down and ask us, or Mrs. Prince, to please search the desk carefully again. And when we do, we will find a box of dimes there, pushed far back in a corner somewhere, or on the floor back of the desk. I said she was guilty, cried Dot proudly. She's frightened and wants to hide her crime. Not guilty, I would say, said Betty calmly. If she stole Dick's dimes, she would have them. She could put the box back without going downtown for dimes and a box. Her actions suggest to me that she is afraid Erastus stole the dimes and that she is trying to protect him. Dick, does Sophia know your dimes were a collection of all different dates? No, Dick said. I don't think so. I just said my box that had 40 dimes in it. And, sure enough, before long Mrs. Prince called down and said, Betty, will you come up? Sophia wants you to search the desk again. And when we went to Dick's room, Betty tried the boxes, and away back in one she found a Keno little cigar box full of dimes. She looked at the box and opened it, and poured out the dimes on the desk. Then she shook her head and smiled sadly at Sophia. I'm sorry, Sophia, she said. I honor you for trying to protect Erastus, but it won't do. This isn't Dick's box, because his box was older. And Dick's dimes were all different dates, none newer than 1933, and these dimes are all 1935. This is not Dick's box, and these are not Dick's dimes. For an instant Sophia looked scared, and then she sat down on the edge of the bed and just cried. She sobbed and said Erastus was not a thief, and that he wouldn't take even a pin that did not belong to him, and then she said we could blame her, and that she had taken the dimes, and that she had given them to Erastus. She saw that Mrs. Prince could send her to prison, but that Erastus was an innocent boy. Well, of course, nobody believed her, because she was just trying to protect Erastus, but somebody knocked on the back door just then, and Dick went down. He called upstairs when he had gone to the door. Betty, he called, come down here a minute, will you? And Betty went down. It was Erastus at the back door. Erastus, Betty asked him, as soon as he was in the kitchen, what did you do with the money Sophia gave you yesterday? Gave me? He asked, grinning from ear to ear. She didn't give me any money yesterday. I got plenty of money. What did you do with the money you took from Dick's room yesterday, then? Betty asked him. Miss Betty, Erastus said, still grinning, I didn't take any money from anywhere. I got plenty of money like I say. I've got a job every night in Betsman's bowling alley. I give money to Ma, I do. I don't know what you're talking about. Have you got any money in your pocket? Let's see it, Betty said. Sure, I've got money, Erastus grinned, and he dug into his pocket and brought out $2 bills and a $half and a dime. The dime was one of the bright new 1935 dimes. $2.60, Erastus said. And I gave Ma $2 yesterday to get some food for Pa. And I'll get more. Come on Saturday night, when Betsman pays me. I save plenty now, because I don't smoke cigarettes anymore. You don't smoke cigarettes? Betty asked quickly. No, ma'am, Erastus said. I gave it up more than a month ago, and I haven't smoked any since then. I get a cough like Pa has, and I decide not to smoke any more. You don't smoke anything at all? Betty asked. No, ma'am, said Erastus. I just get along without tobacco. You didn't smoke anything yesterday? No, Miss Betty, Erastus said. Why do you want to know? What do you ask me all this for? I'll tell you before long, Betty said. Erastus, did you help Sophia wash windows yesterday? Yes, I did so, Erastus admitted, but he was more serious now. Right here in this house I washed windows yesterday, Miss Betty. You know which room is Dick's? Did you go into Dick's room? Yes, I sure did, Erastus said. I and Ma were in there together. She washed inside, and I washed outside. When you were in there, Betty asked, speaking slowly and never taking her eyes off Erastus's face, did you see a box, a Keno little cigar box? No, ma'am, said Erastus seriously. At least if I did so, I didn't take any notice of it. What's the trouble, Miss Betty? Is that box gone? That's it, Erastus, Betty said. The box is gone, and there were 40 dimes in it. 39, Dick corrected her. You know I took one out. 39, then, Betty said. $3.90, Erastus. And the box was, where did you leave it, Dick? On top of the desk, I'm pretty sure, Dick said. Yes, on top of the desk. I might have been there, Aristus said, shaking his head. I didn't look at that desk, as far as I know. Ma washed the insides of the windows, and I came in and the windows were open, so I went right to them, and sat out and washed. And I went right out of that room. Dick, Betty said suddenly, Sophia never took that box. She would have seen that the dimes were old ones. And I don't believe Aristus took them. Go and call Sophia, Aristus wants to see her. Tell Dot and Madge to come down, and come to the living room yourself. I've got to think about this. There's something wrong somewhere. So we all came down but Mrs. Prince. Sophia went to Aristus in the kitchen, still weeping, and we four sat in the living room. Now the question is, said Betty, if neither Sophia nor Aristus took the money, who did? We can easily check up to be sure that Aristus does not smoke, and I believe he is telling the truth. But the cigarette ashes in Dick's room are our main clue. How did they get there? Who was in Dick's room? If we knew that, we would know just about everything, wouldn't we, Superintendent? I could not help asking her then. And I think I do know right now, said Betty. I think another clue has been staring us in our faces all the time, but we ignored it. What clue? Dick asked. The box itself, said Betty, the Kino little cigar box. Who smokes Kino little cigars, Dick? Why, Father does, said Dick. I said so long ago. But Father wouldn't steal my money. That's nonsense. But Betty began, but before she had said any more, the street door opened and Mr. Prince came into the hall. He looked into the living room and caught sight of us. Hello, everybody, he said, smiling at us. Having a meeting? We're solving a crime, Art Dane told him. Good work, Mr. Prince laughed. And, by the way, Dick, I've got something of yours. I went into your room to speak to you this morning, but you were asleep, so I didn't bother you. I saw a box on your desk and thought it was a box of my Kino little cigars and slipped it into my pocket. I remember thinking it seemed pretty heavy. And, he laughed, when I got to the office and opened it, I found it was full of dimes. We all went to the kitchen to tell Sophia, the whole detective club. She listened until we were through, and then she cried, "Praise the Lord," and threw her arms around Aristus and kissed him. It was a good ending. Six. The Red Handbag Mystery. Our detective club was meeting that afternoon at Carver's. All of us attended the meeting, but there was nothing to detect, so we were reading a mystery novel. Dick Prince and Arthur Dane were lying on the grass, and Betty Bliss and Carver and I were sitting in a half circle. Betty was reading when Mrs. Henchley came hurrying into the yard. Mrs. Henchley was very much excited. She is a fat woman and always gets excited when there is anything to get excited about. Betty stopped reading, and Dick and Arthur got to their feet. "My God!" Mrs. Henchley cried, all out of breath. "I've been everywhere trying to find you." She had been at Betty's house and at mine. "And here you are? I've been robbed. I've heard that you girls can catch robbers, and I had $40 taken right off my kitchen shelf. $40? Right there in my red handbag, and me, not a half hour before, standing right there making some fudge for little Essie Dean's birthday. She's 4 tomorrow. And I was out in the backyard no more than half an hour." She stopped to get a breath. She was going right on talking, but Betty Bliss stopped her. "Just a minute, Mrs. Henchley," Betty said. "You have been robbed and want to have me and my men take the case? You should catch the thief and get my money back is just what I do mean," said Mrs. Henchley. $40 in my red handbag, right there on the bottom shelf in my kitchen. And if you want to know who took it, I can tell you, though I don't know which. The butcher boy came, and the grocery boy came, and the iceman came, all while I was lying in my steamer chair under the apple tree in my backyard. But, if you ask me, I say it was the boy in the red sweater." By that time we knew that Mrs. Henchley meant that someone had gone into her kitchen while she was out in her backyard, and that the person had taken her red handbag with $40 in it. Betty Bliss was standing now. "Inspector Prince," she said to Dick, handing him the book we had been reading, "put this book on Inspector Carver's porch. Mrs. Henchley, we will do our best to solve this crime." "What do you mean by the boy in the red sweater?" "Well, Mrs. Henchley began. "Superintendent Bliss, if you please, while we are on the job," said Betty politely but firmly. "Well, Superintendent Bliss," said Mrs. Henchley, "I was in my backyard, like I said, and I got cooled off and came around the house, and I didn't know yet that my money was gone, my purse with my money in it, but I did see, across the street, a tall boy in a red sweater. Now who's that boy? I said to myself, I don't know that boy. He was walking away toward the corner. So just then he looked around over his shoulder and he saw me, and the minute he saw me, he began to run. He ran to the corner and went around it, and that's the last I saw of him." "You didn't see whether he had your bag?" asked Betty. "Whether he had it or not, I don't know," said Mrs. Henchley. "Little did I dream then that money and a handbag had been stolen from me. And if he had it, he would have put it under his sweater, wouldn't he?" "Probably," admitted Betty. "Did you notice whether or not there was a hole in the sweater, about as big as my fist, in the back just under the right shoulder?" "Did I notice?" said Mrs. Henchley. "No, I did not. Why should I? I just thought I don't know that boy. I wasn't thinking anything about holes in sweaters." "Did he have a hat on, or a cap?" Betty asked. "Now, wait," said Mrs. Henchley. "Let me think. No, he did not have a hat on. Nor a cap either. He had dark hair and a good deal of it." "Dark hair," repeated Betty. "And about how old would you say he was, Mrs. Henchley?" 16 or 17. Like a high school boy. He had long pants on, I'm pretty sure of that, anyway." "Light-colored pants?" asked Dick Prince, and then said, "I beg your pardon, Superintendent Bliss." "You may answer, Mrs. Henchley," Betty said. "Yes," said Mrs. Henchley, after she had thought for a moment. "Yes, I would say they were light-colored." Betty looked at Dick, raising her eyebrows. It was clear they thought they knew who the boy in the sweater was. "Blister Furnigan?" she asked. "It sounds like him," Dick answered. "If the sweater had a hole in the back it would be Blister Furnigan. But I never thought Blister Furnigan would steal anything. They're poor, but I always thought they were honest." "So I supposed," agreed Betty. "But in a case like this, we must not neglect any clue. Why did he run when he saw Mrs. Henchley? Inspector Dane, and you, Inspector Prince, will go at once and try to find Blister Furnigan. Try to learn where he was when this crime was committed. Report to me at Mrs. Henchley's. We will now go to the scene of the crime." Betty Bliss walked with Mrs. Henchley, but Dot and I were close behind. Dick and Art, of course, had hurried off to see if they could find Blister Furnigan. I knew why Betty had sent them. We girls couldn't very well go to him and ask the questions that needed to be asked. But Art and Dick could. I was pretty sure that it must have been Blister Furnigan. Mrs. Henchley's description of the boy sounded like him, and there were so many people that needed money. I knew how poor the Furnigans were. But Betty was no one to make up her mind without being pretty sure. "I think now," she said to Mrs. Henchley, as we went along toward the house, "you had better tell us as much as you can about what happened. You say the butcher boy and the grocery boy and the iceman came to the house while you were in the backyard?" "Yes, miss, yes, Superintendent," said Mrs. Henchley. "Like they always do when I'm upstairs or out in the yard, they went right into the kitchen." "You saw them go in?" Betty asked. "No, I didn't see them. I was in my steamer chair, like I said, out there in the backyard under the apple tree, and the back of the chair was toward the house. I didn't see them." "How do you know they were in the kitchen?" "Easy enough," said Mrs. Henchley. "They hadn't come when I went out of the house, and when I went in again, the new ice was in the refrigerator, and the meat and the groceries were on the kitchen table, where those boys always put them." The first thing I did was put the meat in the refrigerator, and then I went to the shelf to see if the fudge was hardening. It wasn't. I'm not very good at making fudge, that's the truth. And then I saw that my handbag was gone from that same shelf. You couldn't have put it somewhere else? Asked Betty. You couldn't have taken it into another room before you went outdoors? Indeed, I did not, declared Mrs. Henchley positively. I know it was there on the shelf. And I know it because I opened it and took out a handkerchief just before I went into the yard. This handkerchief, she said, holding it up. I see, said Betty. And when you went out to the yard, Mrs. Henchley, you left the back door unlocked, of course. Oh, the back door? Mrs. Henchley cried. Certainly I left it unlocked. I always do leave it so the delivery boys can get in, but there's no lock on it. There's a bolt inside. I bolted at night. But I didn't go out by the back door. I went out the front door. Dot and I stepped closer so that we could hear everything Mrs. Henchley said. You went out by the front door? Betty asked. And around the house to the back, Mrs. Henchley explained. And the reason was that I hang out a sign that says ice when I want Morosini to leave ice. So I went out the front way and hung up the sign, and just went around the house, and out to the chair under the apple tree to cool off after making the fudge. And came back the same way, suggested Betty. To take down the ice sign, I suppose? No, answered Mrs. Henchley. I didn't know then that the iceman had been. The sign is still hanging there, I guess. I just remembered I hadn't locked the front door, and I like to look at my flowers at the side of the house now and then, so I came around to the front. So the front door was not locked, and the back door was not bolted, said Betty. That made it rather easy for whoever took your handbag, if it was taken, didn't it, Mrs. Henchley? Well, said Mrs. Henchley, as if she was now a little ashamed of leaving the house so wide open, well, I've never been robbed before. I've left that house open, day after day, and year after year, and never a thing has been taken. Not a pin. Maybe I'm too trusting, but I did think folks in this town were honest. By this time we had reached Mrs. Henchley's house, and we all looked at it, for it was the scene of the crime. It was a pretty little house, white with green shutters, and no fence. There was a low hedge, not much more than knee-high. On the sunny side of the house was a flower bed and a neat gravel path, and that was the way Mrs. Henchley had gone to the backyard and come back again. Where were you when you saw the boy in the red sweater? Betty Bliss asked when we were in the yard. Mrs. Henchley went to the corner of the house. Right here, she said. I stopped to look at those flowers and took a couple of steps that brought me to here, and I looked across the street. I suppose the bright red of the sweater caught my eye. The boy was about where that telephone pole is, and he was walking. He looked over his shoulder and saw me, and began to run. That's the corner he went around. Yes, I think I understand all that now, Betty said. Now about the others, Mrs. Henchley. The Iceman, you said he was Morosini. Do you know anything about him? Do you think he would take a handbag? I don't know, said Mrs. Henchley, somewhat troubled. You see, he's not Joe Morosini, the one I've always got ice from. This is a new man, Joe's cousin, and Joe hired him only a couple of weeks ago. He came from, I don't remember where Joe said he came from. I don't know anything about him, except that he is good-looking and always smiling. He's very pleasant, and always wipes his feet before he comes into the kitchen. I thought he was all right. And the others? Asked Betty. The butcher boy and the grocery boy? There, said Mrs. Henchley, even more troubled. I don't know anything at all about them, except that one's name is Jim. That's the grocery boy from Henson's store. The other, I don't even know his name. He's from Schmidt, the butcher. The red-haired boy? I asked. Yes, very red-headed. That's the boy, said Mrs. Henchley. That's Mike Dooley, superintendent, I told Betty. He brings the meat to our house. He's a fresh kid, but I wouldn't think he'd steal. You don't either of you know this Jim from Henson's, do you? Betty asked us, but we did not know him. Well, inspectors, she went on, this looks like a very difficult case. So far there isn't a clue that amounts to a thing, and any of the four persons Mrs. Henchley has told us about might be the criminal. In fact, inspectors, almost anyone might be the criminal. For half an hour both doors of the house were open, with no one to watch them. Anyone could have come in. Anyone could have taken the red handbag, inspectors. Had I better get the police? Asked Mrs. Henchley anxiously. You may have to, said Betty. But we haven't yet seen the actual scene of the crime. There may be a clue there. When Mrs. Henchley led us into the kitchen, she locked the front door carefully this time. You may be sure I couldn't see anything that looked like even a sign of a clue. The kitchen was very clean, with not a single footprint. There's nothing here, I said when I had glanced around, and Dot shook her head and said, not a thing. But Betty said nothing. She stood a few feet away from the shelves and looked at them, glancing up and down. And then I bent forward and down because a tiny little meow had come from a wastebasket under the shelf on which Mrs. Henchley's handbag had been lying. Oh, the lovely little kitten! I cried, but just as I was about to pick the kitten out of the basket, Betty grasped my arm and held me back. Don't touch anything. Don't touch a thing, she ordered. I stepped back, of course, and Betty went a step nearer the shelf and looked here and there on it. She bent her head over the wide, flat pan of fudge on the shelf and just touched it with her finger, and then she looked down at the kitten in the wastebasket and frowned. Do you always keep the kitten in this wastebasket, Mrs. Henchley? She said. Why, not to say always, said Mrs. Henchley, going to Betty's side and looking down into the basket at the kitten. I put it there today, when I went out to the yard. I just got that kitten today, this morning, and when I went out I dropped it into the basket there, so it would not be wandering around. And a good place for it, said Betty. It can't climb out of that basket. No, indeed, agreed Mrs. Henchley. The little thing hasn't strength enough for that yet. It was a lovely little kitten, and it might be called either a white kitten with gray markings or a gray kitten with white markings. It had a white face with clear gray eyes, and the whites of its eyes were blue-white. It was just about the cleanest-looking kitten I had ever seen, and very young, just old enough to leave its mother. It is a little darling, I said. I longed to take it in my arms and pet it, but, of course, I did not do that. I guess that Betty thought the kitten was some sort of clue, but I couldn't see what the kitten could have had to do with the taking of the red handbag. Just then Dick and Arthur came. Mrs. Henchley had locked the front door, people always do after things have been stolen, and Dick and Art rang the bell, and Mrs. Henchley went to let them in. The two boys were hot and red-faced from running, and Dick told their news as soon as they were in the kitchen. It was Blister Furnagin that Mrs. Henchley saw, he said, and I don't believe he had anything to do with the handbag. He was across the street here, but he did not see Mrs. Henchley. When he looked in her direction he looked high above her head, looking at the clock in the town hall tower, and when he saw the time he ran. He had promised his mother to be home by then. Even so, Arthur began, we may be wrong. We can't prove the Blister was not in this house. It does not matter, inspectors, Betty Bliss said. Thanks for your work, but the mystery of the red handbag is solved, I believe. You can recover the handbag and the money, Mrs. Henchley. In fact, Betty smiled, I believe it will be returned to you. You haven't taken the kitten out of this basket since you put it there, before you went out to sit under the apple tree, have you? Indeed not, said Mrs. Henchley. When I came in and found the handbag gone, I was so excited that I ran right out of the house. Betty turned to Dot. Now, Inspector, she said, what is this under the bottom shelf? It is a box, Superintendent Bliss, Dot answered. It is a box with potatoes in it. Exactly, said Betty. And extending out from under the shelf a little, like a step. And what is that on the second shelf, Inspector Madge? It is money, I said. It looks like 2 or 3 bills and some change. It is $8.30 I put there to pay the iceman, said Mrs. Henchley. A $5 bill, and 3 ones, and some change. "And now, all of you," said Betty, "look at this pan of fudge. You notice that it is away off to one side on the shelf, out of even my reach when I stand here. What do you see in the fudge?" "Why, marks of kitten paws," cried Dot. "The kitten must have walked on the fudge." "Exactly so," agreed Betty Bliss. "And from that, I think we can deduce who took Mrs. Henchley's red handbag. If the thief was a man, or even a big boy, would he take time to lift the kitten out of the basket and let it walk around on the shelf when he was stealing a handbag?" "No, Superintendent," I said. "If he was here to steal and could see that $8.30 there," Betty continued, "would he leave it there? Or would he take it?" "He would take it," Dot answered. "Just so," said Betty. "So what is the answer?" "Whoever entered the kitchen was interested in the kitten and took it out of the basket and put it on this shelf and let it walk around. The kitten walked across the pan of fudge and left its tracks. Then the criminal caught the kitten when it was within reach again and put it back in the basket." "Why, sure," Art cried. "Blister Fernigan would not waste time playing with the kitten," Betty went on. "Neither would the butcher boy or the grocery boy or the iceman. And they, or any man thief or woman thief, would have taken the money from the upper shelf. The thief, I think, had to stand on the potato box." I gave a shout. "And was a little girl?" I cried. But before I could say more, there was a sharp knock at the back door. When Mrs. Henchley opened the door, Mrs. Dean stood there, holding little Essie Dean by the hand, and in Essie's hand was the red handbag. The little girl held out the handbag. "My mama says I got to bring this back, and I got to say I'm sorry. And can I play with your kitty, Mrs. Henchley, please?" "She did not know it was wrong to take the handbag, Mrs. Henchley," said Mrs. Dean, and we knew that Mrs. Henchley forgave the child, for she took her in her arms and kissed her. 7. The Goldfish Mystery. It was Saturday morning, and I was on my way to Betty Bliss's to see if she would play tennis. As I reached Betty's gate, I saw a fat, cheerful-looking man coming toward me down the street. He reached me just as I put out my hand to open the gate. "I beg your pardon," he said, raising his hat and opening the gate for me, "but are you Miss Betty Bliss, the young lady who is president of a certain detective club I have heard of?" I said, of course, that I wasn't, but that I was Madge Turner, and that I was a member of the detective club, and that I was just going in to see Betty, and that I knew she was at home. "Now, that's fine, very fine indeed," the little man said. "The fact is that I want the help of your detective club, and I want it immediately. Last night 20 lovely goldfish were removed from a summer house on my property, bowl and all, and I want to know who did it." He stood back to let me enter the gate, in the most polite way. He insisted on ringing the doorbell for me. If he had not been there, I would just have opened the door to call for Betty. Betty herself came to the door, and this very polite man bowed at least 3 times. "Miss Betty Bliss?" he asked. "Ah, very nice indeed. I am fortunate to find you in. My name is John J. Milwig, and I have come to beg your help. Somebody took his goldfish out of his summer house," I told Betty. "He wants the detective club to help him." 20 lovely goldfish," said Mr. Milwig. "Beautiful ones. They cost 10 cents each. And I pay $2 for the bowl, a big glass globe. I want you to tell me who took them. I'll pay you." "Oh, we couldn't take money," Betty said. "We only play we are detectives for fun." Mr. Milwig raised his hand. "Wait," he said. "Don't object. Surely your club has a library, detective novels and mystery stories and so on. Then allow me to offer a $10 reward which you may use to increase your library. I must insist. If you please." Betty looked at me, and I nodded a yes, because, why not? "All right," Betty said. "We couldn't take money for ourselves, but we can accept a donation to the club's library if we solve the mystery." "You are kind, most kind," said Mr. Milwig, as if he were delighted. "I shall never forget this kindness." And shall we go immediately? While the clues are fresh? Betty was in action at once. Inspector Turner, she said to me, the detective club will solve the 20 Goldfish Mystery. Run over and get Inspector Dorothy Carver, and I will telephone Inspectors Prince and Dane, and ask Mother if we may go to Mr. Milwig's place. Inspectors Prince and Dane were, of course, the two boys we had allowed to join the detective club after they stopped laughing at us and had discovered that we really could detect something now and then. So I hurried to get Dorothy, and by the time she had got her hat and coat, and we were back at Betty's again, the boys were there. Mr. Milwig was bowing and being polite to everybody. Betty's mother had said we could go. Mr. Milwig? Mrs. Bliss had said, "Yes, dear, I think it will be all right if the boys go with you. I met Mr. Milwig at Mrs. Denton's tea last week, and he seems a very nice man. He is the man who bought the Coverton place a couple of months ago. He is certainly the most polite man I ever saw," Betty said. "What business is he in, Mother?" "I don't believe he is in any business now," Mrs. Bliss said. "I think he has retired. I heard he was interested in fish, tropical fish and all kinds, and is going to raise them." She told Betty to wear a coat because it was cool that morning, and we all went in a group to Mr. Milwig's house. I had never been inside the old Coverton place. It was quite a large property with a tall brick wall all around it. I think one reason the Covertons built such a high wall was because just back of them was what is called Shanty Town, where some of the rougher people live, and the Covertons had dozens of fruit trees, apples and cherries and pears, and lots of grapes. When we came to the Coverton place, Mr. Milwig took a key from his pocket and unlocked the gate, which was really a door in the wall. There was a push button which, I suppose, rang a bell in the house when the butcher, or grocer, or anyone wanted to get in. Mr. Milwig stood bowing and waiting until we were all in, then he locked the gate again. "I keep the gate locked," he said. "The grapes are ripe, and boys will be boys. Please come this way." Straight ahead of us was the path to the house, but, off to the left, was a gravel path that led to the summer house, where the goldfish had been. The path was fine gravel, and had been carefully raked, and no one had walked on it since it had been smoothed. "Wait a minute," Dick Prince said. "Was this path raked this morning?" "Dear me, no," declared Mr. Milwig. "Yesterday noon Silas raked it. He is a hired hand I employ now and then. I let him out of the yard at 5 o'clock and locked the gate after him." "We know Silas," I said. "He cuts our grass. He does odd jobs for the whole neighborhood. And he is fond of my goldfish," said Mr. Milwig. "He would stand by the hour, looking at them, if I would let him." "The point is," said Dick Prince, "that nobody walked on this path lately, not since Silas raked it. The goldfish were not carried to this gate." "Unless someone walked on the grass, and not on the path, Inspector," said Betty. "But let us see the scene of the crime before we make any deductions." We were walking toward the summer house. It was built like a small Greek temple, raised 3 steps above the lawn, with 8 white marble pillars and a rounded roof, and it was open on all sides. There were 4 white benches in it, and, right in the middle, a white marble pedestal with a flat top. "There," said Mr. Milwig, pointing at the pedestal. "My bowl of goldfish stood right there on that pedestal. It was a big bowl. It was this big." He showed us how big he meant, and the bowl would have been an armful for Betty, or Dot, or me, almost too heavy for us to carry, if it was filled with water. Our Dane and Dick Prince walked up the steps of the summer house. They were eager to be first. Betty turned to me. "The omnibus of crime will be won," she said, and I looked at her. I did not know what she was talking about. "What?" I asked. "What did you say?" "The omnibus of crime," she repeated. "It is a book. I think that is one of the books we will buy with the reward money." "My God!" I cried. "You must be very sure we will win the reward. You talk as if you had solved the mystery already." "Perhaps I have, Inspector," Betty said. "I have one clue, anyway. But let us go on." We went up the 3 steps into the summer house, and Dick Prince was pointing out things to Dot and Art, while Mr. Milwig stood by, rubbing his hands. A little water spilled on the floor, but not much, Dick was saying. A little water spilled on the pedestal top, but only a little. Was the bowl very full, Mr. Milwig? Now, that's a clever question, Mr. Milwig said. The bowl was very full at midnight last night, when I left the summer house. I sat here, smoking a cigar. Here is the ash by this bench, said Art, pointing. Clever, clever, cried Mr. Milwig. That's where I sat, true enough. But what do you deduce from the bowl being full, sir? It is too soon to deduce anything, Betty said, but I think it means that the bowl of goldfish was not taken by a boy or a girl. No boy or girl could have taken the bowl from the pedestal without spilling more water than was spilled here. Clever, Miss Betty, Mr. Milwig said with a smile. I'd rather you call me Superintendent Bliss when we are at work, if you don't mind, Betty said. It is one of the rules of the club. Quite right, Superintendent, said Mr. Milwig. We must obey the rules. But what are your inspectors doing now? Dick and Art were on their hands and knees, crawling on the grass around the summer house, feeling it with their hands. Dot had picked up a small fish net from the floor, a net about as big as a teacup, with a wire handle a foot long. This is dry, Superintendent, she said to Betty. That means it was not used to dip the fish out of the bowl. I thought maybe the thief had come with a jar to put the fish in. Then what became of the big glass bowl, asked Betty, and all Dot could say was, well, rather doubtfully. By this time Dick and Art were through crawling around the summer house. No water anywhere on the grass, Art said. I thought we might know in which direction the bowl was carried away if we found water spilled. But it settles one thing, a man or a woman took the bowl, water and all. Unless it was taken by a large strong boy, perhaps, suggested Mr. Milwig. And, as for the direction, may I show you something that might be a clue? With that he led us across the grass, to the left of the summer house, and stopped where the grass ended, and a large vegetable garden began. Off to one side, we could see the grapes he had mentioned, the vines climbing over a dozen trellises. To the other side were hundreds of dahlia plants, all wilted now. Mr. Milwig noticed Betty looking at them. All gone, he said, rather sadly. The frost got them last night. As it was late in the season, quite a lot of the vegetable garden had been cleared out. The lettuce and beans, and so on, were gone, and the ground where they had been was carefully raked and smoothed from the edge of the lawn to the tall brick wall. There, said Mr. Milwig. See that? It was easy enough to see what he meant. From the wall to the edge of the lawn were footprints, such as anyone would make if he climbed over the wall and went toward the summer house. And this was not all. From the edge of the lawn to the wall was another row. Oh, Dick Prince cried. I'll say it is a clue. This shows what happened. Someone climbed over the wall, took the goldfish, and went back the same way. This settles it. Clever, Mr. Milwig began, but Betty cried, Stop, because Art and Dick, and I too, were about to walk on the garden. Don't walk there, Betty ordered. Don't destroy those footprints. They are most important. Keep well back from those rows of footprints. Inspector Dodd and Inspector Madge will come on this side with me. Inspectors Prince and Dane may take the other side. Mr. Milwig, I'll just stand here, said Mr. Milwig. As you please, said Betty. What do you make of these footprints, Inspector Prince? Well, Superintendent, Dick answered. Someone climbed over the wall, that's clear enough. He walked across here, leaving his footprints. He went into the summer house, took the goldfish, came back to the wall, and climbed over. Now the thing to do is to study these footprints. Then we find the man who has shoes that match the footprints. Silas, for instance. I'd try Silas first. And you, Inspector Dane? Asked Betty. It looks clear enough to me, just as Dick says, Art began, but Betty stopped him. Dick, she asked. Who's Dick? My mistake, Art laughed. I mean Inspector Prince. I think as Inspector Prince does. There's nothing else to think, is there? We'll have to find the man whose feet match these footprints. Someone in Shantytown, I'd say." "And how are you going to match up the feet and the footprints?" asked Betty. "Are you going to bring every man in Shantytown here to show his feet?" Betty walked to the tall brick wall, being careful not to step on the footprints, and bent down to look at those closest to the wall. Then she said, "Would you mind coming here, Mr. Milwig?" Mr. Milwig was standing on the grass at the edge of the garden, and he looked at Betty with a strange smile, and gave a strange little laugh. "Oh, no," he said with a wave of the hand. "No, thank you, Superintendent Bliss. You are solving mystery, you know." Betty turned her head toward him, and, for a moment, her eyes met his. I can guess now what her eyes said. They said, "We need not pretend any longer. We understand each other," and Mr. Milwig raised his hands and laughed. "I surrender. You win, Superintendent." Of course we had all crowded as close to Betty as we could without stepping on the footprints, and now Dick Prince asked, "What's the matter? What does it mean?" "You tell them, Superintendent," Mr. Milwig said, and he walked over to where Betty was bending beside the footprints close by the wall. "Nothing is the matter, except that I knew who took the bowl of goldfish before we even came inside Mr. Milwig's wall," Betty said. "All I needed to prove that I was right was these footprints. I believe you noticed, Inspector Prince, that one row of footprints leads from the wall toward the summer house, and that the other row leads from the direction of the summer house to the wall." "Sure, I did, Superintendent," agreed Dick. "As if," said Betty, "someone had climbed over the wall and walked to the summer house, and then had come back again. But the footprints could have been made quite another way. Someone could have walked from the summer house to the wall, and then walked back again toward the summer house. And that was what he did." "How do you know?" asked Art Dane. "These footprints are all the same depth in the soft soil," explained Betty. "Those close to the wall are the same depth as the others. Now, if anyone had climbed over the wall from the outside and had dropped to his feet here, the footprints closest to the wall would be much deeper than the others. And they are not. So no one climbed over the wall." "That's right," Art cried. "And no one climbed back over the wall from this side," said Betty, smiling a little, "because no one could climb this wall without a ladder to help. And there is no mark of a ladder here." "He could have jumped up and caught the top of the wall and pulled himself up," suggested Art. "With a bowl full of water and goldfish?" asked Betty. "Some water would have spilled out, even if anyone could do it, and carry a bowl of that size. No, Inspector, these footprints were made as a blind. Will you please step to one side, Mr. Milwig?" "I said I surrendered, didn't I?" said Mr. Milwig, but he stepped to one side as Betty had asked, and we all saw quite clearly that the footprint Mr. Milwig had made was exactly like those we had been studying. "Betty," I cried, "do you mean that Mr. Milwig took the goldfish himself?" "Of course," Betty laughed. "He never said they were stolen, he said they were removed from the summer house. He did not ask us to find a thief, he asked us to tell him who removed the goldfish from the summer house. Well, you see those dahlias? Frosted and dead, aren't they?" "That's a point," said Mr. Milwig cheerfully. "That's a point I did not think of myself." "Didn't you?" asked Betty. "But I thought that a man who was so fond of goldfish would not leave them out after it was frosty enough to kill dahlias. I thought you would take them into the house, Mr. Milwig. You might have thought, as you sat there smoking your cigar, 'Dear me, it is getting cold. I believe I'll take my goldfish into the house.'" "Just what I did think," admitted Mr. Milwig. "And so," said Betty, "having heard of our detective club, you thought you would have a little fun with us." "No, no," declared Mr. Milwig. "Not fun. I merely thought I would see how clever you were, my dear young people. And I am delighted. But I don't see yet how you knew it was Mr. Milwig and not someone else," objected Art. "A real thief could have made those footprints." "Certainly, Inspector," said Betty, "but suppose you were going to steal 20 goldfish. You wouldn't try to carry away a whole big bowl full of water. You would have brought a jar just big enough to hold the goldfish and a little water." You would not have wanted the bowl, because if it was seen anywhere it would be proof that you had stolen Mr. Milwig's fish. Or, if you had been foolish enough to take the bowl, you would have spilled some of the water out, and you and Inspector Prince could find no spilled water. But, Superintendent Bliss, I said, you knew from the first that Mr. Milwig had taken the fish. How did you know? Why, that was simple, Madge, laughed Betty. Mr. Milwig said the fish were worth 10 cents each, and that the bowl was worth $2. That is only $4. And he offered a $10 reward. People don't offer $10 for the return of $4 worth of property, not if they are serious. And what? I asked. Betty looked at Mr. Milwig and laughed. I rather guessed that Mr. Milwig was just testing us, Betty said, because he did not need our detective club to solve such a simple mystery. You see, Madge, I happened to hear yesterday that, before Mr. Milwig retired, he was one of the cleverest detectives in New York. Well, Mr. Milwig just laughed, and slapped his leg, and laughed again. The best $10 worth of fun I ever had, he said. He was very pleased. He enjoyed it. He asked us to make him an honorary member of the detective club, and we did. "8. The Hurry Up Mystery. Our detective club meets every Thursday afternoon, and, when we have no mystery to solve, we read a good detective mystery story, each reading a chapter in turn. This Thursday afternoon we were to meet at Betty Bliss's home. Betty is the one who suggested having a detective club in the first place, so, of course, she is superintendent, which means chief detective, and the rest of us are only inspectors. We have school Thursday and we have to carry home an armful of books for homework, so before the detective club meeting each of us left our books at home. Betty had gone straight home, and the rest of us went to her house after leaving our books. There were 4 of us on the way to Betty's. Dot Carver was one, and there were Dick Prince and Art Dane. We had let them join the detective club, even if they were boys, and I made the last of the 4. I'm Madge Turner. So we walked along, not hurrying much and talking about the mystery story we were going to read. We were in front of Betty's house, and just about to enter the yard, when the door swung open and Betty rushed out, no hat on her head. She did not stop when she came to us. "Come on," she cried excitedly. "Hurry up. We're wanted. Mrs. Simpson's." That was all I caught of what she was saying, for she went running down the street as fast as she could run. For just an instant we stood looking after her, and then Dick Prince took my hand and ran, and Madge and Art Dane followed us. By that time Betty was half a block ahead of us. She can run. "Hurry up," Dick Prince shouted at me. Betty went around the first corner, and Art and Dot caught up with us. "Run," Art urged. "Hurry up. It must be murder or something," and he and Dot passed us. When we came to the corner, Dick went around it so fast I almost fell. Up the street we saw Betty run into a yard, and Dick dropped my hand and ran. He caught up with Art Dane and Dot, and passed them. I was out of breath, but I could still run slowly, and I did. When I reached the Simpsons' porch, the others were already on it. They were looking at a square birdcage that hung on 2 nails against the side of the house. And Mrs. Simpson's maid, Delia, was talking fast. She had been crying too. "What is it? What's the matter?" I asked Betty. "You will kindly not interrupt, Inspector Madge," she said. "Every minute is precious. If we waste time the damage will be fatal. Now, Delia, you say you heard what?" "Feet," said Delia. "On the porch. Like somebody walking. So I came to the door, and was just in time to see somebody hurry through the bushes there, and out of the yard." "You didn't see who it was? You didn't get a good look at the person? You could not tell whether it was a man, or a boy, or a woman, or a girl?" "No, ma'am," said Delia. "I wasn't expecting anything much, you see, and it took a bit of time to get the door unlocked. Mrs. Simpson locked it when she went out. The first time she's been out since she was sick, Miss Betty." I wouldn't have thought anything was wrong except that Jenny was hopping around, singing like she is now. I noticed the canary cage more particularly then. It was divided into two parts by a wire screen. There was one canary in each part. One canary was quite calm, and, even as I looked at it, it began to sing the loveliest canary song I had ever heard. But the other bird was hopping anxiously up onto a little nest in the corner and hopping down again, crying in a worried way. "Talk fast," Betty said. "What did you do then?" "I looked in the cage," Delia said, thinking maybe the Jenny bird had no water to drink, but she had plenty, and seed too. "And then I saw the 3 little eggs she'd been setting on were gone. I was scared, Miss Betty, for Mrs. Simpson hoped to have Jenny hatch out the eggs, so I telephoned you quickly." "And quite right, Delia," Betty agreed. "You see now, inspectors, why it is so necessary to hurry. We must get the eggs back before they get cold. Once they are cold they will never hatch. We have minutes only, not hours, in which to find the 3 stolen eggs." "2 stolen eggs, Miss Betty," said Delia, "for one of them got broken when it was being stolen. Here it is, ma'am." She went to the edge of the porch and showed Betty the broken egg where it lay half hidden by the leaves of a bush that had pushed through the porch railing. Betty bent down to look closely at the pretty blue shell. "You're sure this is one of the eggs that were in the nest?" she asked. "Indeed I am," declared Delia. "Wasn't I looking at the pretty things 3 or 4 times a day while Mrs. Simpson was sick and telling her about them?" Betty straightened up and looked at the cage again. "You say Mrs. Simpson was greatly interested in the eggs?" she asked. "I suppose they were valuable." "It wasn't that so much, Miss Betty," Delia said, "though eggs from that pair would be worth a lot. She paid $50 each for the 2 canary birds, and 3 little ones would be worth $150, no doubt. But she was proud of having her Jenny lay eggs and hatch them." "Yes," said Betty, "I know how excited I was when our canary laid an egg the first time. Mrs. Simpson was quite sick, wasn't she, Delia?" "She was. It was like a nervous breakdown," Delia said. "The doctor could not get her to take an interest in anything. She just lay there in bed, poor lady. And the first time she brightened up was when Sammy told her Jenny had laid an egg. She had me bring the cage and hang it in her room and show her the pretty blue egg. It was like she had something in life to be interested in again, poor dear. And, of course, when Jenny laid more eggs she was more and more pleased and interested," suggested Betty. "I suppose the eggs are about ready to hatch, Delia?" "Well, you can see by that one there, Miss Betty, the little bird was about ready to come out of the shell. We expect them to hatch any time now." Our Dane had been getting more and more impatient as Betty and Delia talked on, and now he interrupted them. "Listen, Superintendent," he said. "Excuse me for breaking in, but you're wasting a lot of time. You say the eggs would be no good if they got cold. Well, I don't believe whoever stole them would want them to get cold. If they're worth $50 each, or even $25 each, he'd want to keep them warm. He would put them under another canary as quickly as he could, wouldn't he? So there's another clue. Look for somebody with a hen canary that is setting on eggs." "Why, that's quite an idea, Inspector Dane," Betty said. "Sure it is," declared Art. "How about the thief being somebody that owns a cheap canary and who knew about this excellent pair of Mrs. Simpson's? All we've got to do is find that setting canary." "It's your idea, Inspector," said Betty, smiling a little. "It's only fair to let you find the setting canary, don't you think? How many canaries do you suppose there are in Westgate?" "Why," said Arthur, "why, I don't know." "Hundreds, wouldn't you suppose?" asked Betty. "There have been hundreds always, and there were those 3 big canary sales not long ago. And another thing, Inspector." "Well, what?" Art asked. "I suppose you would know the 2 stolen eggs when you saw them?" Betty asked. "They would have these eggs were stolen from Mrs. Simpson written on them, would they, Inspector?" "Well," said Art, "I just made the suggestion." "How did you mean to go on, Inspector?" Betty went on, making fun of him. "Were you planning to go to each owner of a hen canary and say, 'Excuse me, But may I look in your cage to see if you stole some eggs? You might go and look in my mother's canary cage first, Inspector. Or how about going down to Brambo's and asking him if someone has offered to sell him canary eggs in the last hour or so? Say, that's an idea, said Dick Prince, for Brambo was the bird storeman in Westgate. Wouldn't the thief try to sell the eggs? And who would be more likely to buy them than Brambo? He probably has a setting canary or two. And the thief would say, Mr. Brambo, I have here 2 eggs I stole from Mrs. Simpson. She has those $50 canaries. Is that what he would say, Inspector Prince? No, Brambo is honest, Dick admitted. He wouldn't buy stolen eggs. The thief would just say, I want to sell a couple of canary eggs that are still warm, suggested Betty. How would he explain that, Inspector? He might tell Brambo that his hen canary had died suddenly, said Dick, but he knew that sounded silly. I said so. Nonsense, Dick, I said. Mr. Brambo wouldn't buy canary eggs. If he did, he would only pay a few cents for them, unless he knew they were from a very fine canary. So there are 2 objections to your idea. A thief wouldn't risk coming up on this porch and take the chance of being caught just to get a few cents, and if he asked Mr. Brambo to pay more than a few cents, Mr. Brambo would want to know where the eggs came from. You have made a very wise remark, Inspector Madge, Betty said. But, look here, Dick objected, if the thief wouldn't take the eggs to get a few cents, and if the thief knew he couldn't tell Mr. Brambo where the eggs came from, he wouldn't steal the eggs. Inspector Madge almost says the eggs were not taken. Oh, yes, they were taken, said Betty. Delia knows they were in the nest in the cage, and you can see they are gone, so, but Dot interrupted her shyly. Dot never speaks out words the way I do, and she never says anything unless she thinks it is important. I'm sorry to interrupt, Superintendent, she said, but you said this was a hurry-up job, and aren't we wasting a lot of time just talking? I mean, oughtn't we to hurry? I mean, won't the eggs get cold while we stand here and talk? Dot's face turned red when she said this, but Betty did not get angry. She gave Dot a pleasant smile. The eggs are not getting cold, Inspector, she said. You need not worry about that now. But you said, Dot said again. Anyway, we are just standing here talking. Quite right, Inspector Carver, Betty said as pleasantly as before, but you know the old saying, the more haste, the less speed. Sometimes a person can go faster by standing still than by running. A man standing on the top of a railway car goes faster than a man trying to run alongside of it. Quite often, at least. Is it a riddle? Art asked. I didn't know we were playing riddles. I thought we were trying to catch a thief. And this doesn't look like a railway car to me, said Dick. It looks like Simpson's porch. If you ask me, girls and boys, I'll say we seem to be just standing here and not getting anywhere. I think we are, Betty said sweetly. At least, if we are standing still, time is passing. So we are really moving from now to later in the afternoon. And that is really quite important. I give up, Dick cried, throwing up his hands and making a face. It sounds crazy to me. But I'm only a poor silly inspector. If anybody asked me for my opinion, I'd say let's get busy. Let's do something. Honest, Super, said Art, I do think we ought to get going. This detective club is going to be blamed if Delia here has to tell Mrs. Simpson we did nothing at all. Very well, said Betty quickly. The inspector desires action, and action we shall have. Inspector Prince, I believe you were the first to mention Mr. Brambo. He did not, said Art. I did. Then, said Betty, you will go to Mr. Brambo's bird store, Inspector Dane, and you will get him to talk about canary birds. You will probably know how to do that. You might begin by asking him, do you sell many canary birds, Mr. Brambo? I'll know how to get him talking. Don't you worry, said Art. I know Brambo. He's all right. All the fellows go in and ask him about the birds he has, and the fish and puppies. Excellent, Inspector, said Betty in her best detective manner. When, then, you have got Mr. Brambo talking, you will ask casually if he ever has any deals in canary bird eggs. If he says no, you may thank him and return here. If he says yes, you will ask him if he has had any such deals lately, and with whom, and when. And then come back here and tell you, said Art. Why, yes, said Betty, if you want to. Art made a face, but he started for Brambo's bird shop in a hurry. I saw him running down the street. Action! Action! We must have action! Betty cried, clapping her hands. Inspector Prince, go and search the yard. Search the bushes around the porch here, and search the bushes along the fence. Bring what you find to me. What shall I look for? Dick asked. It could not be footprints, because Betty had said to bring what he found to her. You don't mean it will be the eggs, do you? No, Inspector, said Betty. I do not know that you will find anything, but if you do, it will be reading matter. Dick went down the porch steps and began the search of the bushes there. I think he is more likely to find what I have in mind in the bushes by the fence, Betty said, but it doesn't matter. If it is there, it will be found sooner or later. Inspector Madge, do you want to do active duty? I'd rather stay with you, Superintendent, I told her. Honestly, Betty, you look as if you were the cat that had already eaten the canary. I'll stay here, if you don't mind, and see what happens. And you, Inspector Dot? Betty asked. I think we ought to do anything we can, said Dot. Just so, said Betty. We should all do what we can. You will go down the porch steps and out of the yard and turn either to the left or to the right, and Betty paused. I really should have two for this job, she said, one to go to the left and one to go to the right. You are sure you do not want to go, Inspector Madge? No, I said positively, I do not. Edwin ought to be home any time now, Delia said. He could help you, Miss Betty. He'd be glad to. He'll be almost as upset as his ma will be over the stolen eggs. He loved them as if they were his own canaries. You think he will be here soon? Asked Betty. He ought to have been here long ago, but you know how boys are, Miss Betty, they will stop and play. Especially when they know their mothers are out driving, and won't be home till later, said Betty. Yes, I know boys. Very well, then, Inspector Dot, you will turn to the left when you leave the yard. Go slowly in the direction taken by Inspector Arthur Dane, but keep your eyes on the trees. On the trees? Dot asked, probably thinking she had not heard correctly. At a height from 15 to 20 feet from the ground and upward, said Betty. You might look for a nest in a tree that is easy to climb. Betty? I cried and corrected myself. Superintendent, I know what you are thinking. The thief hasn't any canary, so he had to use another bird's nest. That's it, isn't it? It might be, mightn't it? Betty asked. And that's why you've been in no hurry, you clever girl, I went on. You guessed the eggs would be there and would not be getting cold. Dot, I'll go with you. I'll help you find a nest. I think Inspector Dot can do the job alone, Betty said rather coldly. I offered you active duty, and you refused it. I do not like to have my inspectors change their minds. Go ahead, Inspector Dot. Report back as soon as you have found an easily reached nest. I think, she said, when Dot had disappeared down the street looking up into the trees, and Dick was searching the bushes at the front of the Simpson yard, I think we had better go inside the house, if Delia doesn't mind. Why, not at all, Miss Betty, Delia said, and the three of us went in. Betty turned to the left and went into the living room. She pushed the window curtain a little to one side so we could see the porch, and we all sat down. I believe, she said, the case is solved. Something we saw almost as soon as we came up on the porch was the clue to the mystery of the missing eggs. All I ask now is that we all keep quite still when anyone comes onto the porch in a few minutes. As if she had known he would come just then, Dick came onto the porch. He called Super, and Betty hurried to the door. She told him to come in. I found it, if this is the reading matter you meant, Dick said, showing a school bag with 5 school books in it. It's a sort of reading matter, anyway. Edwin's homework school books, just what I thought you would find, Betty said. Sit down, Dick, and keep quiet. If Edwin comes on the porch, and you will see something, if I am not mistaken. You don't suspect Edwin, do you, Miss Betty? Delia asked. I think he took the 3 eggs, said Betty. I don't believe he tried to sell them to Mr. Brambo. We know he broke one, letting it fall when he climbed over the porch railing, and I think he put 2 in a nest, probably in a robin's nest, the one Dot is looking for. Inspector Dot, I said, glad that I could correct Betty. Yes, Inspector Dot, Betty said, accepting the correction. Let us see what the facts are. Mrs. Simpson is out of the house, enjoying her first drive in a long while. She is recovered from a nervous illness. Her canaries, and the eggs laid by the little hen canary, were her greatest pleasure and a means of helping her recovery. Does Edwin love his mother, Delia? Oh, Miss Betty, he loves her dearly, Delia cried. He'd do anything for her. That's why I'd never believe he stole the eggs she was so interested in. On the contrary, said Betty, that is exactly why he did take them. When Inspector Art returns, he will, I believe, report that Edwin bought 3 canary eggs there today. But why, I asked, would he do that? To replace the other 3 eggs, Betty said with a smile. Consider this, Mrs. Simpson was interested in the canaries and Edwin knew it. The doctor probably said it was important that Mrs. Simpson have something to interest her, and no doubt Edwin heard him. He did that, said Delia. I was there. All the little wild birds were laying eggs just then, so Edwin thought of eggs for the canary. He knew his mother would be delighted if her canary laid an egg. So Edwin took an egg from a robin's nest and put it under the little canary hen. Delia, was Mrs. Simpson pleased? Oh, Miss Betty, you should have heard how pleased she was. So Edwin, being a loving son, put another egg in the canary's nest, and then another. But, I know, I said excitedly. Exactly, Inspector, said Betty. The time was near when the eggs were to hatch, and Edwin feared the effect on his mother if her 3 new canaries turned out to be robins, and the telephone rang just then, and Delia answered it. It's Mr. Arthur, she said. He's at Brambo's. He thought you'd want to know that Master Edwin bought 3 canary eggs there not half an hour ago. Half an hour ago, said Betty. He will be here any minute now. But Betty, I asked, however did you guess all that? In detective circles we do not call it guessing, Inspector Madge, we call it reasoning, Betty said. There was nothing else I could think. The broken egg on the porch was a robin's egg. Quiet. It was Edwin coming up onto the porch. He hesitated a moment, looking all around, and then drew a small box from his pocket. He took off the lid, opened the little hen canary's cage door, and put 3 little eggs in the nest. As he came toward the door he was smiling. Edwin, said Delia as he entered the house, come in, here are some young folks to see you. I'll get some cake and lemonade. (9) The Locked Drawer Mystery. That afternoon Dick Prince and Art Dane could not come to the meeting of our detective club because they had to attend a meeting of the sports committee at the high school. They said they might come later. There was nothing for us to detect that week, so we settled down on Dot Carver's porch to read a few chapters of a mystery story. You read a chapter first, Madge, Betty Bliss said, handing me the book, and I had just opened it when I saw a girl stop at the front gate. She hesitated, then opened the gate, and came up the walk. She was no one we knew. She was a plain-looking girl, quite simply dressed and old enough to be through high school, but what we all noticed first was the unhappy and worried look on her face. Please excuse me, she said, looking up at us from the bottom of the porch steps, but is this Mrs. Carver's house? I went to Mrs. Bliss's house, and she told me to come here. I'm looking for some girls who have a detective club. Betty Bliss was out of her chair and at the head of the steps in an instant. This is the detective club, she said. The club is having a meeting this afternoon. Is there anything we can do for you? The girl seemed surprised. "Why," she said, "I thought you would be older than you are. The detective club I mean is the one that, I have been told, has been solving several mysteries." "We are the club," said Betty Bliss. "I don't know of any other in town. This is Inspector Carver and this is Inspector Turner, and I am Superintendent Bliss. If we can be of any help to you, we will be glad to serve you." "I'm afraid I can't pay anything," the girl said, as if she hated to have to say it. "You see, I haven't any money, not much, anyway." "That," said Betty Bliss, "does not make any difference to us. We almost never detect for money. May I suggest that you come up and tell us what we can do for you?" The girl came up the steps and took one of the chairs. "I don't know whether you can do anything for me," she said, "but I am in trouble, and I didn't know who else to go to. I've been accused of being a thief, and I don't know how to prove I'm not." She stopped and hid her face in her hands. I thought she was going to cry, but she managed not to. After a minute or so, she got control of herself and only wiped her eyes. "It's a terrible thing to be called a thief," she said, "and for me, it is worse than for almost anyone, because it means that, for me, everything is ended, and just when I am getting started." "Tell us about it," I began, but Betty Bliss stopped me. "If you please, Inspector Madge, I will question our client," Betty said. And to the girl, "Kindly give us all the facts you can, name, age, circumstances of the crime, with all the details." "My name is Mary Sloan," the girl said. "I'm 16 now, and I'm an orphan. When I was 2 years old they took me into St. Elizabeth's Orphan Asylum, and a week ago I got through there. We have to leave when we are 16 years old. They get work for us, or put us in someone's home. Mrs. Joseph Branch took me." "I know of Mrs. Branch," Betty said. "She is an important club woman. She is managing the Willingham Rummage Shop for the Town Aid Society now, isn't she?" "Yes," said Mary Sloan, "and she was so good to me at first, and so kind. She gave me a nice room upstairs in her house. I thought I would be so happy there. I don't mind doing housework, or washing dishes, or such things. But she has 3 servants already, and she said I was to be her secretary, if I could do the work." "I should think she would need a secretary, as she is in so many clubs," Carver put in, but Betty said, "Inspector, please, and shut up." "Of course, I was pleased," Mary Sloan went on. "I thought it would be fine, and so it was until this happened. Mrs. Branch is spending most of her time at the rummage shop just now, and she took me down there to help her. Every afternoon. Some evenings. They are sending out hundreds of appeals for money, or old clothes, or anything the rummage shop can use, and I addressed envelopes. I write a good hand." "Well, please continue, Miss Sloan," Betty said. "Mrs. Branch handles all the money," the girl said. "She is president and treasurer." "And she accused you of stealing the money?" I cried. Betty Bliss frowned at me. "No, not that," Miss Sloan said, "not exactly. Not much money, anyway. If you let me tell you?" She looked at Betty Bliss, and Betty nodded. "That is just what we want," she said, "and the inspectors will please not interrupt. Go on, Miss Sloan." "It was postage stamps mostly," Mary Sloan said. "You see, there were about 1,000 envelopes ready to mail the first day I went there. They used 2-cent stamps, and Mrs. Branch gave me $40 and told me to go to the post office and get 2,000 stamps, and I did. There were 100 in a sheet, that made 20 sheets of stamps." She took the money out of the drawer. "One moment please," said Betty. "What drawer?" "The drawer of her table. She has a table she uses as a desk. Anyway, she gave me half the stamps to stick on the envelopes, and she put the rest in the drawer, 10 sheets, $20 worth. There was some small change in the drawer, and a few loose postage stamps, perhaps $3 worth, 3-cent ones and 5s. Then she locked the drawer." "Did she always keep the drawer locked?" Betty asked. "Always," said Mary Sloan, "and kept the key in her handbag. She never let anyone else unlock the drawer, so she says." When stamps were needed, Mrs. Branch unlocked the drawer and took them out and gave them to us." "Who's us?" asked Betty. "There are 3 or 4 girls who work there part of the time, society girls, giving their time free. Mrs. Branch would never think they would steal." "Anyone else work there?" Betty asked. "Mrs. Overman, a rather elderly lady who is the paid manager," said the girl, "and a man named Comus Tooks, but I never saw him. He is the doorkeeper and comes to clean up after we are gone." "And all the money that is taken in at the shop is put in the drawer in Mrs. Branch's table?" Betty asked. "Oh, no," said Mary Sloan. "The money that the rummage shop takes in from selling things goes into the cash register, and that is most of the money. The cash register is always locked, and no money was ever missing from it. The money that goes into the table drawer is money that people donate to help the shop along, mostly checks, and the change Mrs. Branch needs to spend for small items the shop needs. The money from the cash register is put into the bank every day." "Yes, I think I understand that," said Betty. "And you say you are accused of stealing? Tell us about that." "Everything was all right until today," Mary Sloan said, trying hard to control her voice. "I've been helping Mrs. Branch just 1 week, and once a week she counts the stamps and the money in the drawer and balances her accounts. And today she said $3.40 were missing. She said no one could have taken it but me." At that Mary Sloan had to stop and hide her face in her hands again. "Mrs. Branch said she couldn't keep me," she went on brokenly. "She said she couldn't have a thief about, and that I'd have to go back to the orphanage. And nobody will want me now, nobody." "Does Mrs. Overman, the manager of the rummage shop, think you took the money?" Betty Bliss asked. "I don't know," said Mary Sloan. "She didn't say anything. I don't know whether she knows anything about it. Perhaps Mrs. Branch did not tell anyone there, but she'll tell them at the orphanage." "Betty," I broke out, "I don't believe this girl took the money. I don't. She wouldn't come to us if, when we are on a case, you will kindly address me as Superintendent Bliss." "Inspector Turner," said Betty, and I felt my face getting red. "And why, Miss Sloan," she asked, "is Mrs. Branch so sure you are guilty?" "Because I was the only one who could have taken it," said Mary Sloan. "Mrs. Branch always kept the key to the table drawer in her handbag, and I was the only one that was ever near her handbag alone. Mrs. Branch was always going to the front of the shop to talk with Mrs. Overman or with some lady that came in, and she would leave her handbag on the table. It was always there within reach of my hand." "And the others, the society girls?" "They were never there alone. I was always there when they were. I was the only person that could have taken the key from the handbag to open the drawer." "I see," said Betty thoughtfully. "And your claim is, of course, that you took nothing from the drawer, that you never opened it?" "I never had the key in my hand. I never touched it. I never opened Mrs. Branch's handbag," cried Mary Sloan. "I wouldn't do such a thing." "But I suppose," said Betty, "you have some theory about the missing money, or stamps." "Yes, I have," said Mary Sloan. "I think Mrs. Branch made a mistake. I think she counted wrong. Or maybe she took out some money or stamps and forgot about it. I told her so." "Did that please her?" asked Betty with a smile. "Oh, she was so angry," cried Mary Sloan. "She said she never made such mistakes. She said that in all the years she had been connected with clubs and associations and charities, she had never made an error of a single cent." "Superintendent Bliss," I began. "Never mind, Inspector Madge," Betty said. "I know what you are going to say. But if Mrs. Branch has, this time, made an error in her accounting, it does not help Miss Sloan any. No one, I am sure, could convince Mrs. Branch that she made a mistake in her accounts. Certainly we girls could not. Miss Sloan, was the key an ordinary key? Could anyone open the lock of the drawer with a hairpin, for instance?" "No," said Mary Sloan quickly. "No one could pick a lock like that." "In other words, Miss Sloan," said Betty, "you are positive that no one could open the drawer without the key, and you are just as positive that no one but you or Mrs. Branch could have the key." Yes, said Mary Sloan, I'm positive. Good. Betty cried. That makes it very much simpler. Inspectors, I think the case is solved. Solved. Dot said. But I don't see. Of course you do, Dot. I said. Betty, I mean, Superintendent Bliss, means that Mrs. Branch did make a mistake in her figures. But, I said, I don't see how you are going to show her that she did, Superintendent Bliss. If she's so sure. But Betty was not really paying any attention to us. She was frowning, deep in thought, and then she spoke to Mary Sloan. Just what did Mrs. Branch tell you to do when she accused you? Betty asked her. Did she tell you to get your things from her house and go back to the orphanage? Yes, she did, said Mary Sloan. She said she did not want me to spend another night in her house. But I had heard the girls at the rummage shop, the society girls who came to help Mrs. Branch, talking about you and your detective club, and I thought I would come to you first. It was all I could think of to do. And quite right, said Betty, but what will you do now? I don't know, said Mary Sloan. I'll have to get my clothes and go back to the orphanage, I suppose. I'll have to tell them. You have nowhere else to go? No other place in the world, said the girl sadly. No place where you can spend a night, or perhaps 2 nights? No place, said Mary Sloan. Well, you're not going back to that orphanage tonight with the story that you are accused of being a thief, said Betty Bliss positively. Inspector Dot, will you ask your mother, or, no, I'll ask mine. I'm going to use your telephone, Dot. With that Betty went into the house, and we others sat silent on the porch, waiting for her to come out. We heard her voice, but could not distinguish the words. It seemed to take Betty longer than was necessary, and we wondered if she was arguing with her mother, but when she came out again she seemed very much pleased. Mother was glad to give you a room for a night or 2, Miss Sloan, Betty said, and when you get your clothes from Mrs. Branch's, you can take them right to our house. Mother will be there to welcome you. And, she said to us, I telephoned to the high school and got Art and Dick on the line, and they'll be here as soon as possible. They were just through with their meeting and were coming anyway. And I think, Miss Sloan, that you had better go to Mrs. Branch's at once and get your belongings. Mother will be expecting you. Mary Sloan seemed very pleased. I honestly believe she would have kissed Betty's hand. There were tears in her eyes and she could not speak. Please remember, Miss Sloan, said Betty, don't quarrel with Mrs. Branch, if she happens to be there. If she says anything unkind, but I don't think she will, just be silent. At the most just say, I am not a thief, Mrs. Branch. She wouldn't be there now, said Mary Sloan. She'd be at the rummage shop now. So much the better, said Betty. And don't be sad. Everything will be all right. So Mary Sloan thanked us again and again, and started on her way to get her clothes from Mrs. Branch's. Now then, said Betty, we'll have to get busy. Inspectors, do either of you know Mrs. Overman, the manager of the rummage shop? I don't, I said, and Dot said, I don't, in the same moment of time. Then we'll have to find someone who does, declared Betty. Dot, do you suppose your mother knows her? She might, Dot said. I know that Mother sometimes takes bundles to the rummage shop, and no doubt she meets Mrs. Overman when she goes there. Shall I ask her? Yes, Inspector, said Betty with a smile, and Dot went into the house. She came out in a minute or 2 with Mrs. Carver, who seemed pleased to be of service to us. Another mystery? She smiled. Dot asked me if I knew Mrs. Overman at the rummage shop. I do know her very well. As a matter of fact, Betty, she and I are members of the same church, and have worked together in the aid for many years. I'm sure you are not thinking she has done anything wrong. She is a lovely person, very kind and sweet. No, Mrs. Carver, Betty said, we only want her help in removing suspicion from a person we believe is wrongly accused. We only want you to tell her who we are, and that we are not really just 3 silly girls. Certainly, I'll do that, said Mrs. Carver. I'll telephone her now. Shall I tell her you are coming to see her? Yes, please, Betty said, and in a few minutes Mrs. Carver told us it would be all right. Mrs. Overman would be glad to see us. Before Mrs. Carver had gone into the house, Dick Prince and Art Dane came. They were excited by the news that we had another mystery case on our hands. What is it this time? Art asked. Tell us what we have to do. We are all excited and eager to go. It must be something hard if you girls have to send for us. You're so smart you usually think you can get along well without any help from us. That's right. Dick laughed. It just shows. When it comes to a real mystery, the ladies have to call on the good men to solve it. Really, said Betty Bliss. We girls are very stupid, aren't we? Well, the mystery is solved, if you care to know it. It is? Asked Dick, naturally surprised. And what was the mystery then? Stolen money and stamps, said Betty. They were kept in a locked drawer with only one key, and only two persons could get the key, and neither one of them stole the money and stamps. The drawer was broken open, said Art. And at the same time Dick said, someone broke open the drawer. Wrong, both of you, said Betty, and as briefly as possible she told them about Mary Sloane and Mrs. Branch, and the missing stamps and money. It might have been either, or both. And you know who took the money? Dick asked. Of course, Betty said. There is only one person who could have taken it. Not Mary Sloane? Certainly not. And not Mrs. Branch? Don't be silly, said Betty. And Mrs. Branch did not make a mistake in counting? Asked Dick. She says not, Betty answered. But see here, cried Art. This is like one of those locked room mysteries, every door and window locked on the inside, and yet the man in the room murdered. If nobody had a key to the drawer. We are wasting time, Inspector, said Betty. The afternoon is passing, and we have quite a little to do. Any of you who have any old clothes or other rummage stuff will please go and get it, and we will all meet in front of my house in 15 minutes. We are going to make a donation to the rummage shop. In less than half an hour we were at the rummage shop, and each of us had a nice little bundle to give Mrs. Overman. There were 2 or 3 customers in the shop, but they thought nothing of us, unless they thought we were 5 merry young people bringing donations. Mrs. Branch and her society helpers had gone home. When Mrs. Overman came to us, Dot told her who we were, and Betty explained that we were the detective club and that we were working on the case, and what the case was. Mrs. Overman was a lovely person. This was the first time she had heard of Mary Sloane having been accused of theft, and that proved that Mrs. Branch was not really cruel-hearted. Mrs. Overman was as sorry for Mary as we were. She said she had thought Mary was a dear girl, and that she would help us in any way she could. We would like to go to the back of the shop to inspect the scene of the crime, please, Betty said, and Mrs. Overman led us there. The small table was just as Mary had described it, and Betty knelt down and examined it carefully, the thin legs, the top made of one smooth board, and the single drawer safely locked. Then she turned and looked at the walls of the room. Inspectors, Betty told us, this is excellent. Here one can see and not be seen. She pointed to the rows of men's overcoats and women's coats and dresses hanging at the far side of the room. Inspectors Dane and Prince, she continued, speaking to Art and Dick, there are some jobs that we girls really should not do, but you can do them, if you are willing. One evening may be enough, or it may take several evenings, but you can be out of here in time to do your homework and get to bed. Out of here? Dick asked. You want us to hide here? Yes, said Betty. The only way to clear Mary Sloane is to catch the real thief, and I believe we can, if Mrs. Overman is willing to let you boys hide behind those coats and keep watch. Quite willing, said Mrs. Overman. Art and Dick were eager to try it, so Betty and Aunt and I went home, and when Mrs. Overman closed the shop and locked the door, she left the boys hidden behind the coats. In less than half an hour, they heard a key turning in the front door lock, heard the door open and close, and Comus Tooks, the doorkeeper, entered. He got a pail of damp sawdust and poured it on the floor and began to sweep. He swept from the front toward the back, and, when he came to the small table, he stopped and stood the broom against the wall. Art and Dick, looking out, saw him clearly. He reached into his pocket, drew out a large pocket knife, and opened the biggest blade. He pushed the blade in between the top of the table and the top edge of the drawer front, making a crack 1/4 of an inch wide, and then he turned the table upside down. The rest was easy. All he had to do was tilt the table a little and shake it, and the loose change and the stamps slid out onto the floor. He bent down and began picking this up, putting some of the change and some of the stamps into his pocket and some back in the drawer. Then Art and Dick stepped out from among the coats. "That will do, Comus," Art said. The doorkeeper gave him one scared look and ran for the front door. He did not stop to lock it. Perhaps he never did stop. He was never seen in our town again. The boys left the pocket knife in the crack above the desk drawer, locked the shop, and came up to Betty's to report. She telephoned to Mrs. Branch immediately, and Mrs. Branch apologized to Mary Sloane and took her back, and everything was all right again. "But, Betty," I asked, "how did you ever guess that Comus took Scott the stamps out of the drawer that way?" "Inspector Madge," Betty said, "don't tell anyone, but that's how I got some money out of my own little table the morning of the day Mary Sloane came to us. I keep change there, locked up, you know, and I had lost the key.